Steven Rogers, aka Captain America, was once a frail young lad from Brooklyn, dreaming of playing his part on the front lines of World War II. After numerous rejections due to his physical weakness, he was eventually noticed for his selfless and heroic nature, and granted superhuman abilities via Project Rebirth. After fighting against the evil forces of HYDRA, he was accidentally frozen for more than half a century, only to be rediscovered and defrosted. From there, he was a key member of the Avengers, protecting the world from threats both earthly and extraterrestrial. He played a key role in the Battle of New York, Ultron's demise, Infinity War, and more. Welcome back to Cinematica. Today we're going to be breaking down the entire Captain America timeline, from his birth, to him getting his powers, all the way up to him time traveling back to relive a different life. Let's get into it. Early life. Steven Rogers was born to Sarah and Joseph Rogers on July 4th, 1918 in New York City. He faced adversity from an early age, with his father's demise in World War I prior to Steve's birth leaving him to be raised by his mother in Hell's Kitchen. While engrossed in playing with toy soldiers, his terminally ill mother, who had contracted tuberculosis while working in a hospital, called him over. Recognizing the striking resemblance between Steve and his late father, Sarah speculated that her son harbored a desire to follow in his footsteps as a soldier. She knew that society might keep him down due to his fragile health. Despite his apparent physical vulnerability, Sarah encouraged him, emphasizing the immense size of his heart. She made Steve promise to use his intelligence to navigate life's challenges, regardless of his dreams. This pledge would echo in his memories for years to come. Years later, in Hell's Kitchen, Rogers ran into some bullies who demanded payment for crossing 10th Avenue. Despite facing a physical and numerical disadvantage, Rogers staunchly refused to comply. The bullies assaulted him, but the encounter took a turn when another boy intervened. Tired of seeing the bullies take money from kids like Rogers, the boy defended him. Rogers joined in and struck one of the bullies with a circular trash can, prompting the thugs to retreat from the alley. The boy, introduced as James Buchanan Barnes, but commonly known as Bucky, was inspired by Rogers' resilience in standing up to the aggressors. In time, Barnes evolved into Rogers' best friend. Rogers, beset by a myriad of health issues such as asthma, scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, high blood pressure, and heart trouble, often fell prey to street bullies due to his physical vulnerabilities. Yet it was his tenacity, despite his diminutive stature, that motivated Barnes to consistently step in and confront bullies whenever Rogers needed support. From 1932 to 1936, Rogers attended George Washington High School in Brooklyn. Following that, he studied at Auburndale Art School, also located in Brooklyn, from 1937 to 38. One time, Rogers and Barnes hitched a ride back to Brooklyn in the back of a freezer truck after they spent their train fare on hot dogs. Barnes also spent $3 while trying to win a teddy bear for Dolores. Another time at Coney Island, Barnes made Rogers ride the Cyclone, causing Rogers to puke. Mother's death. In 1936, Rogers' mother died of tuberculosis. After the funeral, she was laid to rest beside her husband. Following the ceremony, Rogers talked with Bucky Barnes, who told Rogers he could stay at his place and do chores in exchange for lodging. Rogers declined, saying he could manage on his own. When he saw Rogers struggle to find his house keys, Barnes gave him his secret spare key and reassured Rogers that he didn't need to worry because Barnes was there for him to the end of the line. In December 1941, while in art class, Rogers and Barnes received news about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, marking the official entry of the United States of America into World War II. Rogers expressed a strong desire to join the United States Army and fight the Nazis. Barnes took on the role of training Rogers for 2 weeks at Goldie's boxing gym. Eventually, the duo revisited a U.S. recruiting and induction center in New York City, where Rogers received a classification of 4F and was rejected for service. However, Barnes later enlisted. World War II. Witnessing the ascent of Adolf Hitler and the atrocities of World War II, Rogers became resolute in his determination to enlist. In 1943, while in New York City, he attempted to enlist using a false card that said he was from Paramus. While awaiting his turn, Rogers shared a moment with a fellow recruit who, having witnessed the horrors in France, contemplated reconsidering enlistment. Rogers, unwavering, insisted that his resolve remained unchanged. At the enlistment desk, Rogers faced questions about his parents' deaths after World War I. Due to his various health and physical issues, he was repeatedly rejected for military service despite his persistent attempts across different enlistment offices. Undeterred, Rogers remained determined to fight alongside his comrades, making futile appeals to the doctors for a chance to prove himself. Disheartened by his inability to join the war effort overseas, Rogers sought solace in a local cinema to distract himself. During the screening, an advertisement showcased ways soldiers and civilians could contribute to the war effort, emphasizing the struggle against Nazi Germany. Seeing the potential impact of efforts on the home front, Rogers contemplated alternatives if he couldn't fight overseas. An altercation unfolded when a disruptive individual in the cinema showed disrespect to the film's message. Rogers, the lone voice of opposition, admonished the bully to show some respect. Despite the bully's aggression and larger stature, Rogers stood his ground, defending himself with a garbage can lid and resiliently proclaiming that he would endure the ordeal all day. Eventually overpowered, Rogers was rescued by Bucky Barnes, who intervened and chased off the bully. Rogers discovered Barnes wearing his uniform and learned that he'd be shipping out with the 107th Infantry Regiment to England the next day. Despite expressing disappointment at being unable to join him, Rogers was heartened when Barnes suggested celebrating their last night before combat by attending the Stark Expo. Rogers agreed, putting aside his somber mood to stand by Barnes. Stark Expo 1943. Barnes had arranged a double date with two girls, Bonnie and Connie, keeping the plan a secret from Rogers. When Bonnie and Connie enthusiastically greeted Barnes, Rogers couldn't help but inquire about what Barnes had shared with his date. Barnes assured him it was only the positive details, leaving Rogers even more anxious. While exploring the expo with the girls, Rogers and Barnes witnessed Howard Stark presenting his flying car prototype, a creation Stark Industries would manufacture. Stark enthusiastically declared that future automobiles, with the technology they were developing, wouldn't need to touch the ground at all. During the demonstration, Rogers offered sweets to Connie, who declined, before they all watched Stark's car crash to the ground unfinished, much to the amusement of the onlookers. Despite the dazzling exhibits, Rogers noticed a nearby enlistment office and discreetly slipped away from Barnes and the girls. His aim was to make another attempt to enlist in the United States Army, aspiring to finally have the chance to fight overseas. While waiting his turn, Rogers posed beside a picture of a soldier wearing an army uniform. He only made it up to the soldier's chin. Barnes noticed Rogers' absence and later found him, attempting to dissuade him from enlisting again to avoid potential arrest for providing false information on his enlistment form. Rogers insisted on the need to fight for his country, with the looming threat of World War II and Nazi Germany. Rogers argued that he had no right to do any less than the other men fighting for freedom. They said their goodbyes, aware that Barnes would be shipping out the next morning. Despite the serious conversation, they shared joking insults and a hug as Barnes departed. Meeting Abraham Erskine. After overhearing Rogers' discussion with Bucky Barnes expressing his desire to contribute to the war effort, Abraham Erskine arranged to meet Rogers in a secluded room where he awaited tests. Concerned about the potential discovery of his forged enlistment paperwork, Rogers hastily put on his shoes as he saw the doctors leaving the room. However, Erskine entered the room and identified himself as a representative of the Strategic Scientific Reserve. Rogers, curious about Erskine's origin, expressed no concern when Erskine revealed his German birthplace. Erskine then inquired if Rogers wanted to go overseas and fight Nazis. Rogers, initially skeptical and considering it a test, clarified that he didn't wish to kill anyone but had a strong aversion to bullies, regardless of their origin. Impressed by Rogers' principled response and his persistent attempts to enlist in the United States Army, Erskine decided to recruit Rogers as a candidate for Project Rebirth. He informed Rogers that this would be his chance to contribute to the war effort. Rogers enthusiastically accepted the opportunity. Training begins. Rogers journeyed to Camp Lehigh to start his military training. Upon arrival, Peggy Carter introduced herself and displayed her strength by striking Gilmore Hodge when he disrespected her. Chester Phillips arrived and voiced his belief that a man as small as Rogers should not be a part of their operations. Despite earnest efforts to prove himself as a capable soldier with the United States Army, Rogers encountered difficulties in physical training, including an incident where he got entangled in a rope climb and ended up falling upside down. He also faced mockery and bullying from fellow soldiers, particularly Hodge, who sabotaged structures to ensure barbed wire fell on Rogers as he crawled through the mud. Nevertheless, Rogers' determination and quick thinking set him apart from the group, even as he struggled to keep up physically. During a run directed by Michael Duffy, cadets were offered a ride home if they successfully retrieved a flag from the top of a pole. Exhausted, Rogers opted not to climb the pole physically, but instead removed the support pin, causing the flag to fall. By being the first cadet to successfully claim the flag, Rogers earned a ride in Carter's Jeep, much to the chagrin of others who failed to consider such an approach. Despite Rogers' ongoing efforts to demonstrate his worth, Phillips remained unconvinced that Rogers was the right candidate for Project Rebirth. Phillips dismissed Erskine's insistence on evaluating qualities beyond the physical and favored Hodge, who he deemed perfect due to his size, speed, obedience, and adherence to orders. Erskine contended that Hodge was merely a bully, leading Phillips to test their bravery by tossing a dummy training grenade at the cadets. Unexpectedly, Hodge fled for safety while Rogers, demonstrating self-sacrificing bravery, leapt over the grenade to shield his fellow soldiers. Witnessing Rogers' courageous act, Phillips reluctantly yielded, accepted for rebirth. After Rogers was chosen for Project Rebirth, he returned to his room to await the procedure, which was scheduled for the next morning. That night, Erskine visited Rogers, bringing a drink. Rogers asked why he'd been selected over the other stronger potential soldiers for the experiment. Erskine talked about the rise of the Nazi Party and Hitler's quest for power in Germany. He disclosed that Hitler had chosen him to create the perfect soldier. Erskine then shared details about his first test subject, Johann Schmidt, who underwent an imperfect version of the treatment, experiencing negative side effects due to his ambition and obsession with power. Reassuring Rogers, Erskine explained that despite Schmidt's ordeal, he had chosen Rogers because he was inherently a good man. Erskine believed that Rogers, having experienced a lifetime of weakness, would not lose respect for the strength he would gain. He offered Rogers a drink, but took it away as Rogers couldn't consume liquids before the morning procedure. Despite this, Erskine insisted on having a drink himself, and both amused, they promised to share a drink after the treatment. Project Rebirth. On the day of the procedure, Carter escorted Rogers to a clandestine facility. During the drive, Rogers pointed out locations in New York City where he had faced adversity, highlighting their shared experiences of being mistreated for aspects beyond their control. Despite Rogers' awkwardness, Carter was charmed by his sincerity and moral values. Upon arrival, Carter led Rogers into the facility, where members of the Strategic Scientific Reserve awaited to initiate the planned procedure. Carter greeted an elderly woman at the shop desk using their secret code to access the hidden facility behind a large bookcase. Abraham Erskine welcomed both Rogers and Carter while Howard Stark prepared the machinery. Rogers was then instructed to undress in preparation for the experiment, with Chester Phillips observing from a safe distance alongside various generals and senators. Strapped into the HYDRA chamber, Rogers witnessed Erskine delivering a brief speech to Phillips and the other onlookers, detailing the workings of Project Rebirth and its promise to contribute to World War II peace efforts. Rogers winced as he received an injection, expecting the pain to intensify, only to discover it was just penicillin. However, this revelation heightened his nerves about what might come next. Before the super soldier treatment, Erskine provided a countdown, offering a reassuring hand on Rogers' shoulder before administering the super soldier serum. This caused considerable pain. Stark was then directed to activate the machine, lifting Rogers into the air. Rogers endured intense HYDRA radiation doses, screaming out in agony. Despite the excruciating pain, almost prompting Erskine and Stark to halt the process, Rogers insisted that they continue. Eventually, Rogers emerged with a significantly enhanced physique. Transformed from 5'4" and 95 pounds to 6'2" and 240 pounds, the serum also cured Rogers' previous medical conditions. Carter greeted him upon exiting the chamber, asking how he felt. Awestruck, Rogers could only remark on feeling taller. As Carter provided him with a t-shirt for cover, other scientists and generals descended to congratulate the team, with Stark expressing amazement. The mood shifted to excitement as they discussed the potential impact on Hitler and the Nazi Party. Assassination of Abraham Erskine. Shortly after the Project Rebirth experiment, Heinz Kruger infiltrated the facility and shot Abraham Erskine. As Kruger fought his way through the soldiers, he seized the last vial of super soldier serum and escaped. Although Rogers rushed to Erskine's aid, there was nothing he could do. Erskine pointed to Rogers' heart, reminiscing about their earlier conversation, and then passed away. Determined to bring Kruger to justice, Rogers pursued him on foot, saving Peggy Carter from nearly being run over. While Kruger sped away in a stolen taxi, Rogers chased him through the streets of New York City. Despite grappling with his newfound abilities, Rogers caught up with Kruger, accidentally crashing through a shop window, for which Rogers apologized. Leaping from car roofs, Rogers landed on the roof of Kruger's Lucky Star taxi, attempting to pull him out as they careened through the city. However, Kruger fired into the taxi roof, wounding Rogers, who still managed to dodge most of the gunshots. Kruger's distraction led to the taxi crashing, throwing Rogers off, but he emerged unharmed. On his feet again, Rogers continued to chase Kruger, using the broken car door as a shield when Kruger shot at him. Amidst the chaos, Kruger seized a child from the street, taking him to the docks with a gun to his head while still firing at Rogers. Unwilling to let harm befall the boy, Rogers continued after Kruger while the boy's mother cried out in horror. Catching up with Kruger on the docks, Rogers witnessed the assassin holding his Walther P-38 to the boy's head. Rogers intervened, prompting Kruger to attempt to shoot him, only to discover that he was out of ammunition. Frustrated, Kruger threw the boy into the water and fled. Rogers saw that the boy could swim and continued the chase. Kruger attempted to escape by entering a submarine, but Rogers refused to let him evade justice. Diving into the water after Kruger, Rogers, with his newly enhanced strength, caught up with the submarine, punched through the cockpit glass, forced Kruger outside, and dragged him back to the surface for interrogation. On the docks, Rogers threw Kruger and proceeded to smash the serum to prevent its future use. Demanding to know Kruger's identity, Rogers was met with Kruger's insistence that he was merely the first of many. Kruger gave the HYDRA salute before ingesting a cyanide pill, committing suicide before further interrogation, dropping dead in front of Rogers. Recruited by Brandt. Following Abraham Erskine's death, the prospect of reproducing the super soldier serum appeared bleak. Blood samples were collected from Rogers with the aim of replicating the formula. Out of the 12 samples, one was handed over to Howard Stark. Afterwards, Rogers had a conversation with Peggy Carter, who asserted that if the experiment could have succeeded only once, Erskine would have been pleased with it working on Rogers. Discovering Stark still engrossed in perfecting the Pfizer Dorsch, Rogers learned that HYDRA was now utilizing technology surpassing anything they'd encountered before. Rather than remaining confined to a laboratory while scientists attempted to rediscover Erskine's formula, Rogers endeavored to persuade Chester Phillips to permit him to serve overseas and confront Johann Schmidt. However, Phillips declined, asserting that Rogers did not meet the Army's standards. Although Rogers felt disheartened by the realization that he wouldn't be able to serve in World War II as he had hoped, Brandt approached him and acknowledged that his actions in thwarting Heinz Kruger and rescuing the young child had caught the public's attention. Brandt then extended an opportunity for Rogers to serve his country on the war's most crucial battlefield, a proposition Rogers eagerly accepted. Brandt promoted him on the spot. Captain America, performing for the USO. Instead of deploying Abraham Erskine's work for its intended purpose and being dispatched to serve overseas as anticipated, Brandt directed Rogers to embark on a nationwide tour, donning a vibrant costume as Captain America. Rogers reluctantly agreed to promote war bonds for the Treasury Department and rally American participation in the war effort. Performing proved challenging and uncomfortable for Rogers, who yearned to fight alongside his fellow soldiers against the Nazi forces and the escalating threat of HYDRA. Yet, Brandt compelled Rogers to engage in performances and pose for photographs to boost morale. Rogers did his best to make the best of the situation, finding joy in the reactions of young children. Aided by an elaborate show featuring music and dancers, complete with a staged defeat of a faux Adolf Hitler by Rogers every night, Captain America rose to stardom nationwide. Brandt, delighted by the growing success, insisted on posing for pictures with Rogers. After each show, Rogers signed autographs for adoring children. On one occasion, he was approached by a beautiful woman seeking his autograph, leaving the still shy Rogers feeling awkward. The ongoing shows transformed Rogers into a cultural icon for Americans during the war, featuring in his own comic book series and multiple movie serials, where he valiantly battled and vanquished the Nazis while adorned in Captain America's uniform. These comic books were shipped overseas to France, providing enjoyment for both United States Army soldiers and children back home. Continuing to traverse the country from state to state, Rogers' popularity soared among the wives and children of those fighting overseas against Hitler's forces. Concluding each show, Captain America showcased his strength from the super serum soldier by effortlessly lifting a motorcycle and 3 dancers above his head, leaving his ever-expanding audiences in awe. Rogers also lost his virginity to a woman during the tour, disobeying orders. In 1943, while entertaining active servicemen in Italy, Rogers discovered that the soldiers of the United States Army were not as enthusiastic about his act as the 9-year-olds he usually performed for. Instead of embracing his message, Rogers faced abuse from Gilmore Hodge and other soldiers who demanded to see the Star-Spangled Singers rather than Captain America himself. Feeling disheartened by his role in Captain America's USO show and yearning to be a soldier on the front lines, Rogers took a moment to sketch himself as a performing monkey. Peggy Carter joined him and attempted to persuade him that he was destined for more, reminding him of the reasons Abraham Erskine had chose him. Rogers, however, pointed out that despite his disappointments in his current role, at least he hadn't undergone experimentation to acquire the super soldier serum in a lab. During the conversation about his work as Captain America, Rogers witnessed more wounded soldiers returning to base and learned that the 107th Infantry Regiment had been seemingly wiped out while battling HYDRA in Azano. Realizing that this was Bucky Barnes' unit, Rogers urgently sought to determine his friend's fate. Running across the camp with Carter, Rogers went to Chester Phillips' tent, where Phillips teased him about his Captain America character. Rogers pleaded with Phillips to inform him about Barnes' status. Phillips explained that they believed he was gone and that no rescue mission was planned due to its deemed danger and potential risk to more soldiers. Despite Phillips seemingly confirming Barnes as KIA, Rogers refused to accept his friend's death. He stole weapons, equipment, and his shield in an attempt to reach the HYDRA base and find Barnes. Questioning Carter about her belief that he was meant for more than children's shows, she confirmed it. Carter convinced Rogers to let her assist him. Carter and Howard Stark aided Rogers by flying him into Austria, 30 miles behind enemy lines. During the journey, Rogers had an awkward conversation with Carter when he mistakenly thought she was involved with Stark. Suddenly, their plane was attacked, and once Rogers was clear, he ordered Carter to turn the plane around. While she objected to his giving orders, Rogers asserted authority as a captain. Liberation of prisoners of war. Rogers then parachuted from Stark's plane, safely landing in Austria before swiftly embarking on his mission. Sneaking onto a HYDRA truck, he easily subdued the guards inside, successfully infiltrating Johann Schmidt's HYDRA fortress. As his truck arrived, Rogers, using his shield, incapacitated the guard who came to inspect, avoiding detection as he moved through the facility with utmost caution. Knocking out a second HYDRA guard without triggering alarms, Rogers proceeded to find the captive POWs, intending on bringing them back to the safety of the Allied camp. While navigating the facility, he stumbled upon a piece of Tesseract technology, which he took, hoping Stark could analyze it for insights into HYDRA's enhanced capabilities. Upon finding the imprisoned soldiers, Rogers identified himself as Captain America, bewildering his comrades. After freeing them, he strategized with Gabe Jones, Dum Dum Dugan, James Montgomery Falsworth, and other captives before engaging in combat against their former HYDRA captors, facilitating their escape. As Dugan and the liberated soldiers confronted HYDRA running towards the Austrian HYDRA weapons facility, Rogers continued his quest to locate Bucky. Along the way, he noticed Arnim Zola hastily leaving a room, carrying vital plans and blueprints to evade capture. Upon entering the room, Rogers discovered Barnes strapped to a table, seemingly subjected to brutal experiments. Liberating Barnes, who was momentarily disoriented by his friend's newfound stature, Rogers noted a map of Europe in Zola's office, detailing HYDRA's potential targets. As they fled the facility, Barnes inquired about Rogers' transformation, prompting Rogers to offer a vague response, simply stating he had enlisted in the army. Showdown with Red Skull. However, when attempting to reach the exit, the entire facility started to explode, prompting them to seek an alternative exit. Escaping the flames by heading upstairs, Rogers encountered Johann Schmidt, who, along with Arnim Zola, was attempting to flee. Schmidt, expressing his admiration for Captain America, remarked that while Abraham Erskine's Project Rebirth had succeeded, Rogers was not a significant improvement, despite his impressive qualities. Eager to apprehend Schmidt, Rogers punched him, damaging Schmidt's prosthetic mask. In retaliation, Schmidt forcefully struck his shield, leaving a sizable dent due to his enhanced strength. After a brief skirmish, Schmidt, revealing his face to be a mask, exposed his red-colored skull-like visage. While Schmidt fled, Zola retracted the bridge, separating them from Rogers and Barnes. Observing Schmidt's escape, Bucky Barnes nervously questioned if he had the same disfigured face. Schmidt claimed that they had both transcended humanity before fleeing, leaving Rogers and Barnes seemingly stranded with no exit. With the facility rapidly succumbing to flames, Rogers and Barnes reached the top floor, where the only exit was a steel beam. Rogers allowed Barnes to cross first, but the beam loosened, falling into the flames below. Believing there was no way out, Rogers urged Barnes to escape alone, but Barnes refused to leave him behind. Running out of time, Rogers, fueled by his super soldier serum enhanced strength, moved a steel bar obstructing their path before making a daring leap across platforms. Despite narrowly avoiding a fireball, Rogers successfully regrouped with Barnes. Realizing their damaged radio prevented them from informing Peggy Carter of their survival, they embarked on a journey back on foot. Returned to camp. Not long after, Rogers regrouped with the liberated prisoners of war, discovering that Dum Dum Dugan and Gabe Jones had managed to steal a HYDRA mini-tank during the operation. Together, they made their way back to the United States Army camp. Upon their arrival, Rogers requested Chester Phillips to provide medical attention to the men and was reprimanded for his insubordination. However, Phillips refused to discipline Rogers, acknowledging that his disobedience had saved the lives of over 400 captured soldiers. Peggy Carter greeted Rogers, questioning the reason for his late arrival. Rogers explained that he couldn't call for transportation as the radio she had provided him was broken. Bucky Barnes called for everyone to recognize Captain America as a hero, prompting cheers and applause from fellow soldiers. The news of Captain America's daring rescue quickly spread through newspapers worldwide. Recruiting the commandos. Rogers journeyed to England, where he provided Peggy Carter with a detailed briefing on the information he had acquired during his raid on the HYDRA facility. This included disclosing the locations of additional HYDRA bases across Europe, as revealed on Arnim Zola's map. When Howard Stark arrived at the base, he asked why Rogers wasn't in the process of receiving his medal from Britain. Grant, a ceremony Rogers had opted to skip. Chester Phillips then expressed admiration for Rogers' decision. As the idea of Rogers returning to the front lines emerged, he disclosed his plan to assemble a team. Gathering at the Whip and Fiddle, Rogers met with the men he had rescued from the Red Skull and extended invitations to join his team, dubbed the Howling Commandos. James Montgomery Falsworth found the prospect of heading back to the front lines appealing, and Jim Morita agreed. Gabe Jones and Jacques Dernier conversed in French, both expressing their agreement. Dum Dum Dugan, in his typical fashion, declared his readiness to fight, with the only condition being that Rogers open a tab at the bar to keep the drinks flowing, an offer Rogers gladly accepted. Amidst the celebration of their recruitment, Rogers approached Bucky Barnes, inquiring if he would stand by Captain America in the fight against HYDRA. Barnes affirmed his commitment to follow his friend from New York City into any battle. Barnes, noting the uniform, asked if Rogers intended to keep Captain America's uniform when they returned to the front lines, to which Rogers replied that the uniform was growing on him. During their conversation, they were interrupted by the entrance of Peggy Carter, elegantly dressed in a form-fitting red gown that silenced the entire Whip and Fiddle. Carter informed Rogers that Stark had some equipment for him to try the next morning. As music played, Barnes invited Carter to dance, but she ignored him and, looking at Rogers, suggested that once World War II concluded, they could go dancing together. After Carter departed, Barnes, feeling invisible to her, humorously remarked that he was only accustomed to such treatment from the skinny Rogers. Howard Stark's upgrades. The following morning, Rogers returned to the London base for a meeting with Howard Stark. Struggling to locate him, he inquired with Lorraine, who informed him that Stark was currently talking with Chester Phillips. Invited to wait, Rogers discovered that Lorraine had been reading about the liberation of Allied prisoners of war and his involvement. Despite Rogers downplaying his efforts, Lorraine asserted that he had contributed significantly to World War II, suggesting that the women of America owed him their thanks. As a gesture of gratitude, she rewarded Rogers with a passionate kiss. Peggy Carter witnessed the kiss upon her arrival to escort Rogers to meet Stark. Despite Rogers attempting to downplay the situation, Carter chastised him for ending up like any other soldier despite his initial desire to join the United States Army. In response, Rogers questioned her relationship with Stark, to which Carter noted his lack of understanding about women. Later, seeking advice from Stark, Rogers was humorously informed that predicting a woman's thoughts was nearly impossible, leading Stark to focus on his work at Stark Industries. During their discussion about work, Stark presented Rogers with a new uniform and showcased advanced weaponry. Rogers, however, was captivated by a new circular vibranium shield, recognizing its near indestructible and vibration-absorbing properties. Choosing it as his primary weapon and defense, Rogers enthusiastically displayed the shield to Carter, highlighting its impressive capabilities. Carter, seeking revenge for the earlier kiss, shot at Rogers, confirming the shield's effectiveness. As Carter left the room satisfied, Rogers, still shocked by the encounter, presented Stark with his own design for the updated uniform, focusing on practicality as Captain America returned to the front lines of the ongoing war effort, fighting HYDRA. At last, Rogers assumed leadership of the Howling Commandos and was deployed to the front lines. Tasked with the mission to sabotage and dismantle HYDRA facilities across Europe, he continued to lead the team, adopting the title of Captain America. Donning a new and improved uniform with a design reminiscent of the original but more practical for combat, Rogers aimed to inspire his fellow soldiers on this crucial mission. He also inspired civilians with his new look. Leading the commandos, Rogers launched a direct assault on HYDRA, personally engaging and dismantling their outposts. Utilizing the strength acquired through Project Rebirth, Rogers successfully directed his men, reclaiming territories seized by HYDRA. Riding his motorcycle, he infiltrated HYDRA facilities, sabotaging them and making daring escapes as they erupted in explosions, marking successful missions. Amidst the ongoing war, Rogers, along with his Howling Commandos, persisted in battling Nazi Germany, evolving into a seasoned military leader. While issuing commands to the likes of Bucky Barnes and Dum Dum Dugan, Rogers became aware that a cameraman had inadvertently captured footage of his compass, displaying a photograph of Peggy Carter. Slightly embarrassed, Rogers swiftly distanced himself from the camera crew, mindful of the potential amusement it might bring to Chester Phillips if he ever laid eyes on the footage featuring Rogers' sentimental compass. During the winter of 1944, Rogers, acting alone, successfully thwarted a Nazi blockade, rescuing more than 600 men, including the individual who would later become Peggy Carter's husband. Rogers persisted in the mission of dismantling HYDRA facilities, assigning Barnes the role of the commando sniper to safeguard the unit while they carefully navigated through the remnants of the destroyed facilities. As the tides of war shifted shifted in favor of the Allies, Rogers conferred with Dwight D. Eisenhower to deliberate on America's forthcoming battle strategies. Additionally, he was captured on film sharing a moment of laughter with Barnes and participating in a beachfront assault alongside his fellow United States soldiers. Johann Schmidt grew increasingly infuriated by the wartime exploits of Rogers, as Rogers and his current team, the Howling Commandos, consistently thwarted his schemes, causing persistent delays for HYDRA. As Rogers and the Howling Commandos continued to triumph, the Strategic Scientific Reserve also secured victories against HYDRA. This success contributed to the Allies gradually gaining an upper hand in the ongoing war against Adolf Hitler. With each mission, Rogers' leadership skills expanded, enabling him to transcend his image as a propaganda hero and evolve into a genuine leader in America's fight against the Nazis and HYDRA. Capture of Arnim Zola. During a mission against HYDRA, Rogers and the Howling Commandos received information about the whereabouts of one of HYDRA's top scientists, Arnim Zola. They devised a plan to capture Zola, thus eliminating a key ally to Red Skull. While awaiting the arrival of the train carrying him, Rogers and Bucky Barnes reminisced about a past visit to Coney Island, recalling a ride that had left Rogers feeling queasy. Barnes drew a parallel to their current mission. Once the train was spotted, Dum Dum Dugan and Jacques Dernier assisted Rogers, Barnes, and Gabe Jones in setting up a zip line across the mountains. They initiated a stealth attack, preparing to board Zola's armored train. Leading the way, Rogers warned that they had a mere 10-second window to board, receiving well wishes from James Montgomery Falsworth. The mission proceeded as Rogers and Barnes entered the train. While Jones remained on top of the train, Rogers and Barnes silently navigated through the carriages in search of Zola. Armed and vigilant, they moved forward. However, as Rogers entered the next carriage, the doors abruptly closed, trapping him in an ambush. Confronted by a HYDRA soldier armed with a heavy assault rifle, Rogers engaged in a firefight. Simultaneously, Barnes faced gunfire from several HYDRA soldiers. Recognizing the urgency of aiding Barnes, Rogers shot the HYDRA soldier, swung across the carriage using a pulley system, and knocked out his adversary. Using the heavy assault rifle, Rogers blasted open the door, providing Barnes with another gun to eliminate the final HYDRA soldier. After a moment of respite, Barnes claimed to have the situation under control, referencing their conversation about the loud jerk back home in New York City. However, before they could relax, the previously defeated soldier returned, firing upon them with his heavy assault rifle. Despite attempting to use Rogers' shield as defense, Barnes was struck by a blast and thrown from the train. Rogers, devastated by his inability to save his childhood friend, watched as Barnes fell into a ravine. Fortunately, Zola was captured by Gabe Jones and turned over to the Allied forces for interrogation. The mission succeeded as Zola provided crucial intel to defeat HYDRA. Mourning Bucky Barnes. After the devastating loss of Barnes, Rogers returned to London, which bore the scars of the Blitz, seeking solace with a drink at the Whip and Fiddle to mourn his friend's death. However, the effects of the super soldier serum prevented him from getting drunk. Peggy Carter joined him, attempting to console him and assure him that Barnes's unexpected death was not his responsibility. Despite Rogers attributing Barnes's demise to his own actions, Carter conveyed that Barnes understood the significance of their mission to end the war and willingly sacrificed himself. Rogers pledged not to rest until HYDRA was defeated, vowing to personally bring down the Red Skull to avenge Barnes. Carter reminded him that he wouldn't be facing this challenge alone. Following the interrogation of Arnim Zola, intelligence revealed that HYDRA was planning an imminent attack on the United States. Rogers, along with Howard Stark and the remaining Howling Commandos, attended a briefing led by Chester Phillips. They discussed Red Skull's plans involving Tesseract technology and devised a strategy to dismantle HYDRA and confront Red Skull himself. Driven by the desire to avenge Barnes, Rogers, accompanied by the Howling Commandos, formulated a plan where he would ride alone into the base on his upgraded motorcycle, with the army following once he breached their defenses. Attack on HYDRA headquarters. With time running out, the Strategic Scientific Reserve set Rogers' plan in motion as he embarked on a solo mission into the HYDRA headquarters on his upgraded motorcycle, equipped with additional weaponry courtesy of Howard Stark. Charging toward the base, a contingent of HYDRA soldiers on motorcycles pursued him with the intention to eliminate him. Leveraging the Stark enhancements, Rogers deployed a wire across the trees, knocking several HYDRA soldiers off their motorcycles. He then activated a flamethrower, destroying more bikes and gaining a speed boost. Left with only 2 pursuers, Rogers pulled the pin from one of their grenades, resulting in a fiery explosion that consumed both motorbikes. Approaching the base, Rogers affixed his shield to the front of his bike, skillfully evading attacks from a HYDRA mini-tank stationed as the final line of defense. After obliterating the tank with a missile, Rogers reached the base's front and leapt inside, dodging fire from enemy soldiers. Activating his motorcycle's self-destruct mechanism, Rogers encountered flamethrower-based resistance. Surrounded, Rogers jumped off the motorcycle, allowing it to crash into the facility's wall, triggering a massive explosion and creating a breach. Armed with his shield, Rogers fought fiercely in the outer area of the base. Despite his valiant efforts, the confrontation came to an end when soldiers wielding flamethrowers encircled him, trapping him in a ring of fire while others aimed guns directly at him. Captured by Red Skull. Outmatched, Rogers found himself captured and brought to Red Skull. Schmidt criticized Rogers for his arrogance in attacking HYDRA headquarters without backup, questioning whether Abraham Erskine had informed him of the limitless superhuman abilities. Rogers recounted Erskine's description of Schmidt as insane, leading to Schmidt arrogantly asserting that Erskine resented his genius. He sought to deny what he believed was rightfully his with the super soldier serum. Schmidt, noting that Rogers willingly accepted the power, questioned why Erskine selected him for Project Rebirth. In response, Rogers humbly stated that there was nothing special about him, he was just a kid from Brooklyn. This infuriated Schmidt, and he punched Rogers, knocking him to the floor until regaining composure. Despite the impending threat of Schmidt shooting him in the head, the Howling Commandos, armed with information from Arnim Zola, infiltrated the room. They located Schmidt's quarters and burst through the window, initiating their assault and rescuing Rogers before any harm could befall him. As the Howling Commandos engaged HYDRA soldiers, liberating Rogers, Schmidt evaded the chaos while his forces clashed with the commandos. Determined not to let Schmidt escape, Rogers pursued him, and James Montgomery Falsworth promptly provided him with his shield for assistance. Upon catching up to Schmidt, Captain America swiftly hurled his shield at him. However, it became lodged in a doorway, allowing Schmidt to continue his sprint to freedom. While Rogers attempted to free his shield, a HYDRA soldier armed with flamethrowers sought to kill him, forcing Rogers to take cover behind a corner. As Rogers sought refuge from the flames, Peggy Carter approached from behind, shooting the HYDRA soldier in the back, causing his flamethrower to implode and killing him. Rogers then sprinted toward Carter, reminding her of her tardiness following the liberation of Allied prisoners of war. Carter refocused Rogers on capturing Schmidt, prompting him to retrieve his shield and give chase. Spotting Schmidt as he boarded his bomber plane, the Valkyrie, surrounded by soldiers preparing for takeoff, Rogers realized the urgency of the situation. Rogers navigated through the chaos, leaping over soldiers' heads and dodging gunfire to reach the Valkyrie. Despite these efforts, Schmidt initiated the plane's departure, eluding Rogers. Just as it seemed Schmidt would escape, Rogers was unexpectedly joined by Chester Phillips and Carter in Johann Schmidt's coupe. Offering Rogers a ride to catch up with Schmidt, they raced after the plane, utilizing the car's boost to align with the plane's wing. In a moment of urgency, just before leaping onto the plane, Rogers and Carter shared their first and final kiss, while Phillips playfully declared that he wouldn't be joining in on the kissing. Approaching the plane, Rogers braced himself for a last-minute leap, with time running out as they reached the end of the runway. Just as the plane began its ascent, Rogers vaulted onto the wheel, securing his place as it took off. Carter and Phillips managed to stop in time, observing from the HYDRA headquarters as Rogers soared away. Once on board, Rogers swiftly commenced his search for Red Skull. Battle in the Valkyrie. While aboard the Valkyrie, Rogers uncovered the sinister plot devised by Red Skull. He realized that the plane carried piloted suicide drones rigged to detonate over highly populated cities across the United States, posing a threat to millions. Rogers engaged the HYDRA soldiers preparing to board the aircraft. Employing his combat skills, he thwarted their attempts, using a knife to dispatch one and causing another to fall to his demise, carrying the bomb into the ocean. As the situation intensified, a HYDRA operative entered a parasite, making Rogers use his shield in an attempt to stop it. Despite his efforts, it launched with Rogers and another HYDRA agent on top. While the pilot desperately maneuvered to knock Rogers off by spinning wildly, the unfortunate soldier ended up in the path of the propellers, leaving Rogers clinging to the aircraft for survival. Rogers attempted to extract the pilot from the parasite, but the soldier ejected, forcing Rogers to take control of the aircraft. Although he endeavored to return to the Valkyrie, Red Skull unleashed the ship's main weapons in an attempt to shoot Rogers out of the sky. Skillfully evading these attacks, Rogers steered the parasite back to the Valkyrie, crash landing and retrieving his shield. Rogers found his way to the cockpit, initially appearing vacant. However, he swiftly discovered that Schmidt had crept behind him, firing at him. Rogers blocked the attack with his shield in the nick of time. With one of the windows shattered, Red Skull remarked on Rogers' unwavering determination. After deflecting several more shots, Rogers disarmed Schmidt and the two engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Despite briefly losing control of his shield to Schmidt, who struck Rogers with it, Rogers retaliated by propelling Schmidt into the plane's controls, causing the vessel to enter a freefall. During a brief mid-air scuffle, Schmidt managed to kick Rogers away, crawl to the controls, and stabilize the plane, plane back into a normal flight path. With the plane leveling out, Rogers went onto a higher platform, while Schmidt brandished his pistol, attempting to shoot Rogers. Dodging the gunfire, Rogers listened as Schmidt ranted about the misuse of godlike power and declared a future devoid of flags. Unwilling to accept this vision, Rogers hurled his shield at Schmidt, who crashed into the Tesseract Cradle, a device used to harness the incredible power of the Tesseract. Horrified to see his coveted prize damaged, Schmidt retrieved the Tesseract, which had become disconnected from the containment unit due to the impact. Rogers observed as a space portal opened, transporting Schmidt to Vormir. Believing the Red Skull had perished, Rogers then witnessed the Tesseract melting a hole into the plane, causing it to plunge into the ocean below, crashing into ice. After witnessing the apparent demise of the Red Skull, Rogers took control of the Valkyrie, desperately trying to divert its course away from the United States. However, he soon realized the plane was moving too fast, and the landing controls were damaged, rendering it permanently stuck on autopilot. Faced with the challenge of safely landing the plane, Rogers used the ship's intercom to contact HYDRA headquarters, now under the control of the Strategic Scientific Reserve. Answering the call, Jim Morita was soon replaced by Peggy Carter. Informing Carter about the demise of the Red Skull, Rogers explained that the plane was on its way to New York City, too fast for him to devise a plan to stop it. He then said that the only way to prevent catastrophe in New York was to crash land the ship into the Arctic, sacrificing his own life. As Rogers guided the ship downward, he and Carter discussed plans as if he were not about to crash, arranging a future date to go dancing. The ship's eventual crash left him entombed and preserved in the ice. Disappearance. Mourned by a nation that had celebrated his remarkable journey from the USO stage to the newsreels, Rogers was believed to be dead after crashing into the ice. His legacy left a lasting cultural and political impact on the world, influencing it in both positive and negative ways. During Howard Stark's efforts to retrieve Rogers' body, he discovered the Tesseract, prompting further study by the Strategic Scientific Reserve. Captain America remained a highly renowned figure, and a radio series titled the Captain America Adventure Program was created. This fictional program depicted Captain America's wartime adventures, where he fought against Adolf Hitler with the assistance of Betty Carver. Despite its increasing popularity, the show was notably historically inaccurate. Peggy Carter, who had actively participated in many of Captain America's actual missions during the war, despised the program. Her discontent stemmed from the fact that her own role had been fictionalized into the stereotypical damsel in distress character, frequently rescued by Captain America. Stark retained one of the blood samples collected from Captain America after Erskine's demise, with the intention of exploring the possibility of creating a universal remedy. Carter seized control of this sample, which was stored within the Blitzkrieg button. Stark deeply mourned the loss of his friend and considered Captain America his most significant achievement. This sentiment became a vulnerability that Johann Fenhoff exploited. However, Carter managed to persuade both Stark and herself to release their emotional ties and let Captain America go, allowing them to move forward. To honor Rogers' heroic legacy, Carter played a key role in assisting Stark in the establishment of S.H.I.E.L.D. and eventually married a man whom Rogers had rescued during the war. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s search. After being encased in ice for nearly 7 decades following his crash landing in the aftermath of the battle with Red Skull and the Valkyrie, a S.H.I.E.L.D. team led by Nick Fury embarked on a mission to locate Captain America's body. Phil Coulson, a devoted fan of Captain America, was also part of the team that dedicated a year to the search. Eventually, they successfully located Rogers, who, to their amazement, was miraculously alive. Endowed with an enhanced metabolism and an immune system fortified by the super soldier serum, Rogers managed to endure sub-zero temperatures for 7 decades. Reawakening. The defrosting process took place in New York City, where Rogers found himself in a simulated 1941 environment, an attempt to gradually introduce him to the present. Upon awakening, he became more and more suspicious. The radio in the room broadcasted a baseball game, specifically a Brooklyn Dodgers home game that he had personally attended at Ebbets Field. Upon realizing he was being deceived, Rogers was greeted by a woman who wished him a good afternoon. Demanding to know his whereabouts, he pointed out that the baseball game was from the wrong year and insisted on the truth. Alarmed, the woman called for backup as Rogers swiftly escaped into the streets of New York City. In Times Square, he was horrified to discover that everything around him had undergone significant changes. In awe, Rogers found himself surrounded by S.H.I.E.L.D. agents before being greeted by Nick Fury. Fury revealed that Rogers had been asleep for nearly 70 years. Coming to terms with the reality that many of his friends from the Howling Commandos were likely deceased, Rogers felt lost in a world he knew nothing about. Reflecting sadly on Peggy Carter, Rogers informed Fury that he had missed a date. Readjusting to life. Navigating a world that had evolved without him, Rogers struggled to adapt to his new surroundings. Seeking solace, he spent several weeks in seclusion at the Retreat, one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s numerous safe houses. He then took up residence in an apartment in New York City. While there, Rogers delved into files containing information about his friends from the 1940s. Among them, he discovered Peggy Carter's file, revealing she was still alive. The file also provided her current phone number, but he hesitated to call, apprehensive about how Carter might react to seeing him after so many decades, presuming he was dead. Afterwards, he visited a nearby diner and encountered Beth, a waitress who inquired if he had stationed himself outside of Stark Tower in the hopes of catching a glimpse of Iron Man flying by. Misunderstanding her mention of wireless for radio, Rogers engaged in conversation. Despite encouragement from a fellow patron to ask for Beth's number, Rogers decided against it and later headed to a boxing gym. Chitauri Invasion. While working out at the boxing gym, Rogers reflected on various events from his era, including triumphant battles against HYDRA alongside the Howling Commandos. However, memories of Bucky Barnes' death, his confrontation with Red Skull, his sacrifice, his last conversation with Peggy Carter, and his discovery and defrosting fueled his anger until he broke the punching bag. In the midst of setting up a second punching bag, Nick Fury approached Rogers, inquiring if he was struggling with sleep. Rogers remarked that he had slept for nearly 70 years and had his fill. Removing his gloves, Rogers mentioned waking up to the news of victory against Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich, but remained uncertain about the losses America endured in the interim. Fury explained that he had a new mission for Rogers, not just to reintegrate him into the world, but to save the entire world from imminent destruction. Fury then briefed Rogers on the situation. Loki had stolen the Tesseract, intending on using it to conquer Earth. Rogers, not thrilled by the news that Hydra's secret weapon had resurfaced, recalled seeing it fall into the sea after Johann Schmidt's defeat during the battle in the Valkyrie. Fury explained that Howard Stark had discovered the Tesseract while searching for Rogers, believing it held the key to unlimited and sustainable energy worldwide. Despite his reservations, Rogers accepted the mission to track down the Tesseract and Loki. Fury assured him that S.H.I.E.L.D. would provide a comprehensive update before the mission. Acknowledging the world's transformation during his slumber, Fury and Rogers made a playful bet of $10 on whether anything could still surprise him. When asked if there was any additional valuable information about the Tesseract, Rogers suggested that they should have left it in the ocean before leaving the room. Meeting the Avengers. En route to S.H.I.E.L.D. for the upcoming mission aboard the Quinjet, Phil Coulson provided Rogers with a detailed briefing on the selected members of the Avengers initiative. One member that particularly caught Rogers' attention was Bruce Banner. Coulson disclosed that Banner, while attempting to recreate Abraham Erskine's super soldier serum, was exposed to high levels of gamma radiation, transforming him into the Hulk. Coulson emphasized that despite the transformation, Banner remained a genius. During the debrief, Coulson and Rogers had an awkward moment when Coulson admitted to watching Rogers being defrosted, enthusiastically expressing his honor in having Rogers lead the new team. Despite Rogers' skepticism about his suitability as a leader, Coulson reassured him and explained that he personally oversaw the development of a newly constructed uniform for Rogers. Rogers was taken aback by the prospect of donning his iconic stars and stripes, considering it might appear outdated in the modern era. However, Coulson assured him that given the imminent colossal threat, people would find comfort and inspiration in this symbol of hope that the old-fashioned design represented. Upon boarding the helicarrier, Rogers was introduced to Natasha Romanoff and encountered Banner, who awkwardly traversed the helicarrier before shaking hands with Rogers, expressing amazement at his unexpected presence. While discussing their mission to locate the Tesseract, Romanoff advised Rogers and Banner to return inside just before the entire helicarrier ascended, leaving Rogers astonished. Banner humorously pointed out the potential hazards of him transforming into the Hulk within the airborne headquarters. Rogers, Banner, and Romanoff then entered the main control room, where Nick Fury instructed Maria Hill to activate the cloaking mechanism, rendering the helicarrier both airborne and invisible. Rogers marveled at the advanced technology, expressing his amazement by fulfilling the bet with Fury and handing over $10. While Rogers continued to explore the ship, Banner conferred with Fury about the Tesseract search. Romanoff voiced her concern about the time constraints in finding Loki and his mind-controlled hostages, including Clint Barton and Eric Selvig. Banner proposed using gamma emission tracking to locate the Tesseract, and Fury agreed to use S.H.I.E.L.D. resources for the task. As they awaited results from Banner's investigation, preparing to capture Loki and resolve the conflict, Rogers stood alongside Coulson. Coulson asked Rogers to sign his vintage Captain America card collection, which he had diligently collected over many years. Rogers agreed to sign the cards, and Coulson proudly shared how the collection was in almost mint condition. Capturing Loki. Their pursuit proved successful as Jasper Sitwell reported to his superiors that Loki had been pinpointed in Stuttgart, Stuttgart, Germany. Upon confirmation of Loki's location, Nick Fury assigned Rogers the task of capturing him. Rogers donned his new uniform and proceeded to Germany, with Natasha Romanoff serving as his backup. Upon reaching the gala in Germany, Rogers observed Loki compelling a crowd of onlookers to kneel before him, following the murder of Heinrich Schaefer. When Loki prepared to execute those who did not kneel, Captain America deflected the blast from Loki's scepter with his shield, saving a man from harm. Reflecting on his last visit to Germany during World War II, where he confronted Hydra and the Red Skull, Rogers mentioned defeating them before. As he got back on his feet, Loki acknowledged Rogers as the soldier he had heard of, labeling him a man out of time. Rogers asserted that he was not the only one out of time, just as Black Widow appeared behind him in the Quinjet and demanded Loki's surrender. Ignoring the order, Loki fired a burst of energy from his scepter, narrowly missing the Quinjet. Rogers engaged in a heated battle with Loki, who gained the upper hand due to his superior strength, blocking another throw of Rogers' shield. In an attempt to force Rogers into submission, Loki stood over him, commanding him to kneel. Rogers vehemently refused. Despite being at a disadvantage against the god of mischief, their intense fight persisted. Captain America managed to hold his own just long enough for Iron Man to arrive on the scene. As Iron Man descended, he unleashed a powerful blast that sent Loki reeling before targeting him with every weapon in his Mark VI armor. Rogers retrieved his shield and stood alongside Iron Man as Loki seemingly surrendered, dropping his scepter and agreeing to go with them as their prisoner. This left Rogers somewhat suspicious, feeling that defeating Loki had been surprisingly easy. Skirmish in Germany. En route back to the helicarrier, Rogers conversed with Tony Stark, expressing his unease about Loki's seemingly effortless surrender, considering the intense battle they had just experienced. While discussing their distrust of Nick Fury and his penchant for keeping secrets, Stark playfully taunted Rogers. Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected thunderstorm. When Rogers noticed Loki's fear of the storm, he sarcastically inquired if he was afraid of lightning. Loki, however, clarified that his nervousness was due to whatever typically followed the lightning, leaving Rogers somewhat uneasy. Suddenly, Thor materialized on the Quinjet's roof and entered. As Stark suited up, Thor knocked him into Rogers before seizing Loki and soaring away with him. Despite Black Widow cautioning Stark to stay out of the fray, deeming it too perilous, Rogers skydived after them, insisting that there was only one god and he didn't dress like either Thor or Loki. Having parachuted into Stuttgart, Rogers reached the forested area to find Thor and Iron Man locked in a fierce battle over the capture of Loki. Thor aimed to return Loki to Asgard for his crimes, while Iron Man sought to subdue him. Using his shield, Captain America intervened, attempting to mediate between the two, questioning Thor's purpose here. Rogers emphasized the need to unite against Loki's schemes, urging Thor to lower his hammer. Thor, refusing to yield Mjolnir, knocked Iron Man aside and then lunged at Captain America, striking his shield with the mighty hammer. The shield absorbed the impact, generating a powerful shockwave that reverberated through the surrounding woodland, sending Thor reeling backward. After recovering, the trio surveyed the extensive damage caused by their clash. Recognizing the futility of their infighting, they agreed to chill out and apprehended Loki, bringing him back to the helicarrier. Working on the helicarrier. As Loki was being escorted onto the helicarrier and confined in a specially designed cell capable of holding Hulk, Rogers and his fellow teammates gathered to watch a holographic video of Nick Fury interrogating Loki about his plans. Curious about Thor's intentions, Rogers inquired, and Thor revealed that Loki aimed to use an army of Chitauri to conquer Earth, offering the Tesseract to his mysterious benefactor in return. In their question to unravel Loki's motives and why he willingly allowed himself to be captured, Tony Stark joined the group on the bridge, accompanied by Phil Coulson. Stark explained why Loki needed iridium along with Eric Selvig's expertise to stabilize and harness the Tesseract's energy for opening a portal. Rogers sought clarification on the type of power Loki required, prompting Stark and Bruce Banner to delve into a detailed discussion. The conversation extended to Loki's scepter, with Fury drawing a comparison between its brainwashing capabilities and the Wizard of Oz, a reference that Rogers finally understood. Banner and Stark joined forces to track down the Tesseract. During their collaboration, Rogers walked in on Stark attempting to provoke Banner into transforming into the Hulk. Concerned about the potential danger, Rogers urged Stark to focus on finding the Tesseract's location. Stark, however, revealed that he had become more interested in understanding why S.H.I.E.L.D. had assembled the team and what Fury's intentions were. Stark then prompted Banner to share his reservations about S.H.I.E.L.D.'s motives in researching the Tesseract. Banner speculated that Loki's mention of a warm light for all of mankind during his interrogation might refer to Stark Tower in New York City. Stark admitted to using Jarvis to hack into the helicarrier and uncover Fury's hidden agenda. This revelation made Rogers uneasy, leading him to accuse Stark of losing focus on defeating Loki, a claim Stark denied. Rogers eventually uncovered what Fury appeared to be concealing from them. Upon opening a hidden box in one of the rooms, Rogers discovered HYDRA weaponry and technology, including the assault weapons previously wielded by the Red Skull. This led him to conclude that S.H.I.E.L.D. was indeed attempting to harness the Tesseract's power to develop similar weapons. Avengers argument. Upon returning with the secret weapon, Rogers directed directly confronted Nick Fury regarding his plan to utilize the Tesseract to create weapons inspired by the Red Skull's original designs. The confrontation escalated into a heated argument among the Avengers, pressing Fury for information about Phase 2. Eventually, Fury admitted that he was seeking ways to defend Earth against Asgardians and other potent cosmic entities. Thor pointed out that Fury's actions with the Tesseract had drawn Loki and his allies to it. Stark likened Phase 2 to a nuclear deterrent, prompting a discussion about Stark Industries' past involvement in building weapons for the United States Armed Forces. As Rogers and Stark argued over the ethics of heroism, Rogers contended that Stark wasn't the kind of man to make a genuine sacrifice, while Stark argued that Rogers owed his uniqueness to Howard Stark's work with the Super Soldier Serum. As consensus formed among the team that Fury had manipulated them, Bruce Banner asserted that the group was essentially a ticking time bomb. While Stark cracked jokes, Rogers, unable to contain his frustration, threatened to engage in a physical confrontation with Stark, leading to Thor laughing at them. Finally, Banner began confronting everyone, revealing that he had once attempted to end his own life before picking up the scepter, intensifying his anger. Witnessing this, Rogers successfully reached out to him, and Banner realized that Loki had been manipulating all of them while they were on the helicarrier. Attack on the helicarrier. As the argument reached its peak, Hawkeye attacked the helicarrier, launching one of his explosive arrows to damage an engine. Captain America and Iron Man set aside their differences and worked together to prevent the ship from falling out of the sky. While Iron Man worked on repairing the turbine, Captain America inspected the computer relays, finding it challenging due to his limited understanding of modern technology. Rogers then received information that Iron Man would personally restart the helicarrier's propellers and needed Rogers to pull a red lever when signaled, allowing Iron Man to free himself before potential shredding. However, as Rogers awaited Iron Man's cue, he found himself engaged in combat with Loki's brainwashed agents. One of them tried to throw a grenade to further damage the propellers, but Rogers successfully blocked it and retaliated by firing at them with a machine gun. As Rogers continued his firefight, the entire helicarrier began to tilt to its side. Hawkeye, having successfully bypassed Nick Fury and Maria Hill, deployed another one of his trick arrows to disable the helicarrier's power. Amidst the chaos, with Loki's agent firing at him, Rogers lost his footing and plummeted from the platform, barely managing to hold on by grabbing a wire. Iron Man urgently called for Rogers to pull the lever, compelling Rogers to exert his strength and pull himself back onto the platform while evading enemy gunfire. Just in time, Rogers pulled the lever. This allowed Iron Man to fly to Rogers' aid and incapacitate Loki's final agent. In the aftermath, Rogers and Stark discovered that Thor and Hulk had been thrown from the helicarrier, with their current whereabouts unknown. Additionally, Phil Coulson had tragically lost his life at the hands of Loki. Mourning Phil Coulson. After the attack on the helicarrier, Rogers and Stark convened with Nick Fury to strategize. Fury presented Phil Coulson's vintage Captain America card collection stained with Coulson's blood, expressing his intention to assemble the Avengers to tackle challenges beyond S.H.I.E.L.D.'s capacity, a plan Stark was already aware of. Stark left the meeting early, heading to the location where Coulson had sacrificed himself to save Thor. Rogers joined him there, inquiring about Coulson's personal life and discovering his connection with a cellist. While Rogers praised Coulson as a good man, Stark criticized him for not waiting for backup before engaging in the battle. Despite Rogers urging him to focus on the mission against Loki, Stark insisted that they were not soldiers and refused to continue fighting for Fury. Rogers emphasized the need to identify Loki's power source for the Tesseract. Stark, acknowledging that Loki had made the conflict personal by killing Coulson, realized that Loki required Stark Tower in New York City to power it. Stark Tower was designed to generate self-sustaining energy, fulfilling Loki's needs for his plan. Battle of New York. Recruiting the Avengers. The demise of Phil Coulson served as the catalyst that finally unified the team. Rogers discovered the inner strength to take charge and assume the leadership role within the Avengers. While Iron Man confronted Loki in New York City, Rogers and Romanoff joined forces with Clint Barton, who had been freed from Loki's mind control. Adorned in his uniform and wielding his shield, Captain America, along with Romanoff and Barton, gathered in the hangar and commandeered a Quinjet. Despite explicit orders from Nick Fury and Maria Hill to remain on board for ship repairs and intelligence gathering, Barton piloted the Quinjet away from the helicarrier, heading to New York to support Iron Man. Arriving in New York, they were horrified to discover that Loki had successfully executed his plan. A portal had opened from Stark Tower above the city, and the Chitauri army had initiated their attack. While Loki engaged in a battle with Thor, a blast from Loki's scepter brought down their Quinjet. Despite the crash, all occupants survived thanks to Barton's flying skills. As they emerged onto the streets, Captain America looked up at the portal and witnessed a monstrous Leviathan descending, wreaking havoc on the city. Countless Chitauri warriors leaped off the Leviathan. Captain America sought cover beside Black Widow and Hawkeye. He noticed Loki riding one of the Chitauri chariots, raining fire upon innocent bystanders. Recognizing the need to evacuate the people, Captain America decided to leave Black Widow and Hawkeye to combat the Chitauri soldiers on the ground while he sprinted ahead. He leapt off a bridge and then jumped from a crashed bus before racing down the streets as swiftly as possible. Recognizing that his foremost priority was to safeguard civilians, Rogers hurried toward the closest officers of the New York City Police Department, adeptly evading Chitauri attacks along the way. Upon locating Silva and Saunders, Captain America issued directives to the New York City Police Department, emphasizing the need to ensure the safety of the people. Silva questioned why he should take orders from Rogers, but before he could respond, he found himself under attack by 3 Chitauri soldiers. Rogers effortlessly defeated the assailants, showcasing Captain America's strength and combat proficiency. Impressed, Silva decided to heed Rogers' leadership and relayed the instructions to his fellow NYPD officers. Fighting the Chitauri, Captain America regrouped with Black Widow and Hawkeye, who continued to fight the Chitauri using firearms and bows. Thor joined them, emphasizing that the Tesseract was impervious to damage. They collectively decided to focus on repelling the attacking army, and Rogers began formulating their battle plan. As they discussed their strategy, Bruce Banner joined the group, acknowledging the horror unfolding around them. Witnessing a Leviathan approaching, Rogers suggested to Banner that he unleash his anger. Banner, transforming into the Hulk, obliterated the Leviathan. Rogers, using his shield to protect Black Widow from the explosion, witnessed the destructive power of the Hulk. With the Avengers now assembled, Rogers assigned specific tasks to each member, orchestrating a coordinated effort to push them back against the invading alien force. Captain America directed Hawkeye to observe from a building, noting patterns and identifying any outliers. Iron Man was tasked with providing air support and establishing aerial dominance, while Thor utilized Mjolnir's lightning blasts to create a bottleneck at the portal, preventing reinforcements. As the team dispersed to carry out their assignments, Captain America informed Black Widow that they would collaborate to keep the fight grounded, and Hulk's role was to simply do what he excelled at, smashing. While the battle unfolded and the Avengers fulfilled their roles, Captain America supported Black Widow as she confronted a single Chitauri soldier. Using her acrobatics, Black Widow stunned the soldier before turning his own staff against him. Surveying the battlefield in flames, Rogers knew he needed to find a way to close the Tesseract's portal and put an end to the invasion. Romanoff proposed going to the top of Stark Tower herself to attempt to close it, requesting Rogers' assistance and launching her into the air to catch a ride on one of the Chitauri chariots. While Romanoff soared across the battlefield to reach the Tesseract, Captain America found himself encircled by alien forces. Holding his ground, Captain America was then joined by Iron Man, displacing several aliens from the bridge. Iron Man directed an energy beam at Captain America's shield, amplifying and deflecting it, resulting in the defeat of additional Chitauri forces. Engaged in combat with another Chitauri soldier, Rogers received information from Hawkeye that a large group of civilians, including the waitress Beth, were being held hostage by the Chitauri inside a nearby bank. Captain America entered the building, knocking out the lead Chitauri with his shield. During the battle, Captain America's helmet was torn off as he knocked back another Chitauri soldier. Glancing up, he realized a helmetless Chitauri had reclaimed the bomb. Swiftly diving for his shield, he shielded himself from the explosion, though he was still propelled out of the building, landing on a nearby car. Captain America rose to his feet, witnessing the members of the United States Army and the New York City Police Department evacuate the terrified civilians from the active danger zone. Closing the portal. Rejoining the battle, Captain America found himself partnered with Thor, eliminating wave after wave of adversaries. Rogers sustained a direct hit on the side from a Chitauri staff, but he refused to stop fighting. The World Security Council, led by Gideon Malik, determined that dropping a nuclear bomb on New York City was the only way to contain the Chitauri threat, despite the catastrophic impact it would have on Manhattan. Once the missile was launched, Nick Fury urgently informed Iron Man of the impending bomb, leaving mere minutes to spare. While Black Widow suggested using the scepter to close the Tesseract's portal, Stark cautioned Rogers against giving the order prematurely. Instead, Stark managed to pilot the bomb through the portal, destroying the Chitauri command center and eliminating the Chitauri soldiers. However, it seemed that Stark had not survived the explosion. Faced with no alternative, Rogers directed Romanoff to close the portal, ultimately saving the entire Earth from Chitauri conquest. As the portal was closing, they saw that Stark had miraculously survived. However, he was unconscious and plummeting to the ground. Hulk intervened, prompting Rogers and Thor to come to his aid. Upon reaching Stark, they discovered that his heart was not beating, but Hulk managed to startle him awake with a roar. Upon awakening, Stark was informed by Rogers that they had emerged victorious. Subsequently, Rogers joined the rest of the Avengers and heading to Stark Tower to apprehend Loki, who, acknowledging his defeat, surrendered without putting up any resistance. Once the battle was over, the Avengers were joined by S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who arrived to secure the scepter, while Rogers proceeded to coordinate a search and rescue team, departing the Avengers. Following their victory and before they split up, Rogers and the other Avengers ate silently together in the Shawarma Palace. While they were eating, they were interrupted by the arrival of War Machine, who was too late to help. Later, they assembled in Central Park to witness Thor's return to Asgard, carrying the Tesseract with the restrained Loki. Upon Thor's departure, the remaining Avengers dispersed, each going their separate ways until the next call to defend Earth arose. Rogers shook Tony Stark's hand before Stark and Bruce Banner departed together. Rogers rode off on his motorcycle, eager to explore what awaited him in this unfamiliar world. School discipline. After the Battle of New York, Captain America took on a role with the Department of Education, where he was enlisted to spearhead a fitness challenge designed for public schools across the United States, including the Midtown School of Science and Technology. Additionally, he hosted a series of public service videos titled Rappin' with Cap, addressing a variety of subjects to educate America's youth. Among the topics covered in these videos for school children were fire hazards, the significance of a balanced diet, human reproduction, the importance of math and reading skills, dental hygiene, head lice prevention, and the concept of detention. In one particular video, Rogers emphasized the virtue of patience, asserting its potential as the key to victory, or conversely, leading to limited and somewhat disappointing outcomes for those who endure the wait. Ironically, during the filming, Rogers himself grew impatient and inquired about the remaining videos. SHIELD agent. Accepted as a field agent into SHIELD, Rogers persisted in his mission to safeguard people under Nick Fury's leadership. Despite partnering with Natasha Romanoff, he harbored reservations about the organization. During an undercover operation to thwart a mercenary group attempting to abduct Sana Amanat for weapon production, Rogers and Romanoff shared a milkshake in an old Brooklyn diner, a nod to Rogers' upbringing. With Amanat's assistance, Captain America successfully vanquished this organization. Rogers, along with Brock Rumlow and Romanoff, pursued Baker and his team who had stolen the Zodiac. Baker leapt from a building with the intention of deploying his parachute, but Rogers jumped after him, grasping the cord and preventing the parachute's activation. Faced with Rogers' determined pursuit, Baker relinquished the Zodiac. Rogers later informed his team that he believed the Zodiac had been destroyed, but Romanoff revealed that SHIELD had deliberately spread misinformation to maintain its secrecy. This revelation further eroded Rogers' trust in SHIELD. Meeting Sam Wilson. During an early morning jog in Washington, D.C., Rogers encountered a man with whom he playfully exchanged banter, repeatedly calling out "on your left" every time he passed by. Rogers eventually caught up with the man, who introduced himself as Sam Wilson, a former United States Air Force veteran now working in the Department of Veterans Affairs. Wilson, empathizing with Rogers' challenges as a veteran readjusting to civilian life, engaged in a discussion about the difficulties they faced, including the struggle to sleep comfortably. Rogers highlighted the positive aspects of living in 2014, citing the helpfulness of the internet in catching up on missed experiences. They shared thoughts on their lives, and Wilson recommended some music, including Marvin Gaye, for Rogers to explore in this new era. Their conversation was interrupted when Natasha Romanoff arrived to pick up Rogers for an upcoming SHIELD mission. As Rogers left, he teased Wilson about going for a run some other time, and in return, Wilson invited Rogers to join a meeting for individuals dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. As Romanoff pulled up, she playfully inquired about the location of the Smithsonian Institution, teasingly comparing Rogers to a fossil. Retaking of the Lemurian Star. Rogers received information from Brock Rumlow about their mission, rescuing hostages held by Georges Batroc, who had hijacked a SHIELD ship named the Lemurian Star in the Indian Ocean. Captain America took note of the exact number of hostages, including Jasper Sitwell, expressing frustration at Nick Fury for using such missions to conceal his mistakes. After issuing mission orders to Rumlow and the strike team, Rogers prepared for combat. Assigned the task of initiating the attack on the ship, Rogers relied on his enhanced strength for a strategic advantage. While preparing his uniform, he conversed with Natasha Romanoff, who attempted to set him up on a date with Kristen, a suggestion Rogers rejected, still harboring feelings for Peggy Carter and feeling overwhelmed by his responsibilities. Rogers leapt off the Quinjet into the ocean without a parachute, aiming to land on the Lemurian Star. Having successfully landed, Captain America discreetly subdued nearly every pirate on the ship without triggering alarms. Using his shield to gain an upper hand, he navigated through the soldiers, swiftly defeating them. When a pirate nearly alerted Batroc, Captain America silenced him with a thrown knife, and he was saved by Rumlow, who shot another pirate. Captain America requested an update from Black Widow, who was occupied subduing Gerald Durand and Batroc's pirates. Once Black Widow ensured the ship's immobilization, Rogers directed Strike to prepare for action. Rumlow, eliminating the remaining pirates and rescuing hostages, joined Romanoff in clearing the engine room. While Rumlow's team engaged the pirates, Captain America hurled his shield at Batroc, who managed to escape. With Sitwell and the hostages safe, Captain America pursued Batroc. Rumlow then informed him that Romanoff had disappeared during the mission, failing to meet with Strike as planned. Before Rogers could determine Romanoff's whereabouts, he was unexpectedly ambushed by Batroc. The pirate taunted Captain America for relying on his shield and other weaponry. Accepting Batroc's challenge, Captain America engaged him in hand-to-hand combat. During their struggle, Captain America realized that Batroc was a more skilled fighter than expected, deflecting all of his attacks. Despite Batroc's persistent attempts to defeat him, Captain America's enhanced strength from the serum gave him the upper hand. Eventually, he emerged victorious, incapacitating the pirate by smashing him through a locked door and delivering a powerful punch. After the confrontation, Rogers found Romanoff hacking into the ship's computer. He discovered her secret mission to retrieve S.H.I.E.L.D. data using a USB drive. Rogers was somewhat displeased at being kept unaware of Romanoff's secondary mission assigned by Fury. The situation worsened when Batroc regained consciousness and threw a grenade at them. Rogers used his shield to deflect the grenade, and they managed to evade the explosion. Although both survived, Batroc escaped. Rogers expressed his frustration, blaming Romanoff for the failure to capture him. Project Insight. Upon returning to the Triskelion, Rogers confronted Nick Fury. Expressing his frustration, Rogers argued that Fury's decision to give Black Widow a secret order jeopardized the entire mission. Fury defended his actions, stating that he sent in Captain America to prevent such incidents, citing past betrayals that resulted in personal losses, including the loss of an eye. Eventually, Fury promised Rogers greater transparency moving forward. Fury then guided Rogers to the facility's sublevels, recounting a personal story about his grandfather carrying a large gun for protection. He revealed the construction of new helicarriers equipped with advanced technology and weapons designed by Tony Stark, emphasizing that S.H.I.E.L.D. had something more significant than his grandfather's gun. Introducing Rogers to Project Insight, Fury claimed that S.H.I.E.L.D. intended to use the helicarriers to preemptively eliminate global security threats before they materialized. Rogers expressed dissatisfaction with this approach, deeming S.H.I.E.L.D.'s latest methods excessive. Despite Fury referencing the actions of Rogers' generation during World War II, Rogers asserted that the current situation differed significantly, accusing Fury of propagating fear rather than preserving freedom. Despite Fury's insistence that Rogers support the program, he refused and departed. Getting advice. Disenchanted with Nick Fury's approach to global security, Rogers delved into his past by visiting the Captain America exhibit at the Smithsonian. There, he viewed videos chronicling his experiences in World War II alongside the Howling Commandos battling Red Skull. When a young boy recognized him, Rogers smiled and motioned for him to keep silent, a request that the awestruck boy gladly complied with. While exploring the exhibit, Rogers came across a memorial dedicated to Bucky Barnes, portraying him as Rogers' friend and the sole Howling Commando to sacrifice his life in the battle against HYDRA. Rogers then watched an interview featuring Peggy Carter discussing her relationship with him and how he continued to impact her life even after she thought he had perished in action. Carter recounted the story of when Rogers saved over 1,000 men, including the man who would later become her husband. Rogers visited Carter, now well into her 90s, at her retirement home. They engaged in a conversation about the evolving world, and Rogers confessed that his continued affiliation with S.H.I.E.L.D. was partly influenced by her role in its founding. He shared his hope that serving with S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers would help him find his purpose in the new era, but the experience fell short of the simplicity he had known during World War II. Carter playfully remarked on Rogers' tendency to be overdramatic. As they conversed, Carter mentioned that while Rogers had saved the world, she and others had made mistakes during his absence. When Carter experienced a coughing fit, Rogers handed her a glass of water. In that moment, she seemed to forget their entire discussion, reacting as if she were seeing Rogers for the first time in decades. Alzheimer's had taken hold in her old age. Despite the sadness, Rogers smiled and assured Carter that he would never leave his best girl, reminding her of the dance owed to him. Yearning for guidance, Rogers decided to visit the Department of Veterans Affairs to attend a session where Sam Wilson spoke with soldiers grappling with PTSD. In the company of fellow veterans, Rogers felt a sense of belonging as he listened to their stories of returning home and feeling out of place. Wilson offered whatever advice he could to help them navigate their challenges and move forward. After the meeting, Rogers and Wilson talked about their shared experiences as former soldiers. Wilson opened up about the loss of his friend and partner, Riley, in combat. When the topic of retirement arose, Wilson questioned if Rogers was considering it. Rogers confessed that he felt lost when it came to the topic of what to do with his life beyond following orders and serving. Wilson lightheartedly suggested that Rogers could become the ultimate fighter, and then genuinely encouraged him to pursue whatever he truly wanted. Loss of Nick Fury. Riding his motorcycle back to his apartment building late in the evening, Rogers parked it and ascended to his own apartment, contemplating his recent conversations with Peggy Carter and Sam Wilson, as well as his role within S.H.I.E.L.D. following the revelation of the new Project Insight. Rogers strongly disagreed with the moral implications of supporting such a project, maintaining that its use of preemptive targeting only fueled fear for America. Upon reaching his floor, Rogers engaged in a brief conversation with his neighbor, Kate, about her work as a nurse. He gathered the courage to invite Kate on a date, proposing the use of his washing machine in exchange for a coffee together. However, Kate declined, citing exposure to germs on her hospital scrubs, leaving Rogers disappointed. Suspicion arose when Kate mentioned hearing his stereo, which he had turned off. Entering his apartment through the window, Rogers discovered Nick Fury seated on his couch. Fury explained that he'd been kicked out by his wife, but when Rogers illuminated the room, he noticed Fury's severe injuries. Fury disclosed that S.H.I.E.L.D. had been compromised, cautioning against potential eavesdropping by undercover enemies. Saying that only his friends knew the truth about him, Fury was abruptly shot multiple times in the back through the wall, collapsing into Rogers' arms. With the last of his strength, Fury entrusted the Lemurian star flash drive to Rogers, telling him not to trust anyone before losing consciousness. As Rogers swiftly moved Fury to safety behind cover, his neighbor burst through the door, revealing herself to be Agent 13, Fury's operative assigned to monitor Rogers. Agent 13 urgently called for medical assistance and reported the situation to S.H.I.E.L.D. while making desperate efforts to aid the injured Fury. Spotting the escaping assassin, Rogers seized his shield and pursued, leaping from his apartment building to the building across the street, leaving Agent 13 to attend to Fury. Breaking through office doors, Rogers struggled to keep pace with the remarkably agile assailant. Employing all of his strength, Rogers trailed just behind until he found an opportune moment to confront the assassin. After catching up, Rogers hurled his shield at the assassin, who effortlessly caught it with his cybernetic arm. Shocked, Rogers and the masked assailant locked eyes before the latter forcefully returned the shield. Winded, Rogers briefly paused, allowing the agile assassin to escape while he surveyed the city in search of his elusive foe. Fury was transported to a hospital, and Rogers reunited with him, standing alongside Natasha Romanoff as they observed the surgical procedure. They shared a sense of horror as the report came in that Fury's heart had ceased. In the operating room, Rogers, Romanoff, Maria Hill, and other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents anxiously watched the doctor's efforts, ultimately witnessing Dr. Fine declare Fury dead. As Fury was taken away, Hill requested responsibility for his body. Romanoff, suspecting the identity of the shooter based on the reported Soviet bullets, began questioning Rogers. When Romanoff probed Rogers about why Fury had sought refuge at his apartment, Rogers feigned ignorance. Before they could speak more, Brock Rumlow informed Rogers of his summons to a hearing at the Triskelion with Alexander Pierce to discuss the events. Romanoff, remarking on Rogers' lack of skill in deception, seized the quiet moment to witness Rogers discreetly stash the USB Fury had given him inside of a vending machine. Alexander Pierce's warning. Upon reaching the Triskelion, Captain America crossed paths with Agent 13 just as she exited Alexander Pierce's office. As they exchanged glances, Rogers gave only a brief acknowledgement before extending a handshake to Pierce, who expressed it was an honor to meet him, citing his father's service alongside Rogers in World War II. Pierce, presenting himself as one of Nick Fury's closest friends, queried Rogers about Fury's death. Recounting their initial meeting in Botoga and seeking information on the responsible party. Pierce pressed Rogers about Fury's presence in his apartment, leading to a discussion about the surveillance on Rogers' home, which Pierce revealed was orchestrated by Fury himself. Displaying video footage of Georges Batroc during interrogation, Pierce unveiled Fury's covert involvement in the Lemurian star hijacking. The prevailing theory was that Fury aimed to conceal the sale of classified information. In an effort to affirm his allegiance to Fury, Pierce disclosed that he took a seat on the World Security Council at Fury's request, emphasizing their shared belief in dismantling the old world to construct a better one. Recognizing the lack of trustworthiness in Pierce, Rogers refrained from divulging Fury's words and left the meeting, ignoring Pierce's warning that no one would hinder his path. Escape from the Triskelion. With his meeting completed, Rogers then got inside the elevator and prepared to leave. Before he could go down, however, Rogers was joined by Brock Rumlow, who greeted him and expressed his own condolences for Fury's death, claiming that what had happened was messed up. As they went down, Rumlow noted that forensics had found hair fibers of Fury's killer on the rooftop, although Rogers recommended that they wait a bit longer before investigating personally. The elevator then stopped, with more people getting on. As the elevator slowly began to fill up with even more strike operatives, Rogers quickly sensed that something was wrong. Once Jack Rowland stepped inside with his hand on his weapon, Rogers noted that another agent was sweating. He came to the conclusion that Pierce had organized an ambush for withholding information. Giving them all one chance to leave, Rogers asked if anyone wanted to get out before the fight began. Losing all pretense, Rowlands and the other agents attacked Rogers, who used his enhanced strength and martial arts training to gain the upper hand. As all of the attackers had successfully managed to disarm Rogers of his shield, they also attempted to use a pair of magnetic handcuffs to keep him from fighting back. However, they could only get one on him. Having only one free hand, Rogers fought off his opponents. Despite Rumlow attempting to use his taser rod to subdue him, Rogers managed to break free of the magnetic handcuff, taking out 2 more agents with considerable ease. Eventually, the last conscious double agent was Rumlow, who told Rogers that the fight was not personal. He attacked and managed to shock Rogers with the taser rod twice before Rogers disarmed him. Finally, Rogers landed a hard strike against him before throwing him into the ceiling and knocking him out, replying that this attack did feel personal. As Rogers attempted to find a way out of the building, he discovered more strike agents were coming to capture him, sent by Jasper Sitwell. Seemingly trapped, Rogers found that the only clear way out was to cut the elevator cables with his shield. Once the elevator stopped its free fall, Rogers realized that Sitwell and Pierce had sent agents to every floor to capture him. He finally threw himself out of the elevator glass and fell several floors through the atrium of the Triskelion and onto the floor, using his shield to absorb the impact. While the horrified shield looked on, Rogers managed to get back onto his feet despite being in considerable pain and continued his escape, all while Sitwell watched this unfold on his monitors, ordering that Rogers be stopped. With little time left to spare, as Sitwell had authorized the Triskelion to be locked down, Rogers managed to get onto his motorcycle, successfully escaping a roadblock set up for him. As Rogers rode straight down the bridge, he discovered that Sitwell had sent a Quinjet to stop him. Rogers remained unintimidated, however, and instead continued driving straight towards the Quinjet, avoiding its gunfire. Rogers managed to ride right up to the Quinjet before throwing his shield into one of its engines and launching himself to its roof. From there, he proceeded to damage the Quinjet by throwing his shield at its back wings before leaping off, thus causing the jet to crash land before Rogers escaped out into Washington, D.C. To keep S.H.I.E.L.D. from tracking him, Rogers hid his uniform inside of the duffel bag of a high school coach whose clothes he took, hiding in plain sight. Successfully evading the Triskelion ambush, but aware of being pursued by Jasper Sitwell's agents, a disguised Rogers returned to the hospital. There he discovered that the USB, previously hidden in a vending machine, was missing. During his search, Rogers was surprised to find Natasha Romanoff behind him, revealing that she had already taken possession of the USB. Guiding her into an empty room, Rogers pressed Romanoff aggressively about the USB's location, while she, in turn, questioned why Nick Fury had entrusted it to him. Upon learning that Fury had hired Batroc to hijack the Lemurian star, Romanoff confessed to knowing the identity of Fury's assassin. She identified the masked man as the Winter Soldier, responsible for numerous assassinations over the past 50 years, and disclosed her previous encounter with him. Despite the inherent risks, they reached a mutual understanding of trust. Rogers and Romanoff swiftly donned disguises, with Rogers complaining about ill-fitting shoes, and ventured into public to seek answers. As Romanoff provided tips on maintaining cover, they visited an Apple store, utilizing a laptop to access the USB and search for valuable information. While Romanoff hacked into the computer to access this USB drive, they were approached by Aaron, eagerly offering assistance. To divert him, Romanoff, posing as Rogers' fiancée, moved him away, accepting Aaron's compliment on Rogers' glasses. Aware of the time constraints, with S.H.I.E.L.D. likely tracing the USB, Rogers kept a vigilant eye on the clock. Romanoff successfully triangulated the location for unlocking the drive to New Jersey. Recognizing the coordinates at Camp Lehigh, Rogers insisted on their immediate departure. Exiting the store, they discovered that Strike had already arrived. Preparing for a confrontation, Rogers was coached by Romanoff on evading the agents, particularly Jack Rowlands. To avoid detection, Romanoff instructed Rogers to appear intimate by holding her close and sharing laughter. When Brock Rumlow appeared, Romanoff strategically kissed Rogers in public, diverting Rumlow's attention and allowing them to escape. HYDRA uprising. Rogers and Romanoff proceeded to commandeer a car and drive to New Jersey. During their journey, Romanoff inquired about Rogers' car-stealing skills, to which he recounted his experiences during World War II. He playfully clarified that they were merely borrowing the car and advised Romanoff to remove her feet from the dashboard. Teasingly, she questioned whether their recent kiss was his first since the 40s, a notion he firmly denied. As they continued driving, Rogers and Romanoff delved into a conversation about her ability to conceal her true self for an extended period. Despite their extensive collaboration in both S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers, Rogers still found it challenging to grasp who Romanoff truly was. When asked about his expectations, Rogers simply urged her to be his friend. Romanoff smiled and suggested that Rogers might be in the wrong profession if he was genuinely seeking friends. Upon reaching Wheaton that evening, Rogers visited Camp Lehigh, the former training camp from his World War II days and Project Rebirth. While exploring the base with Romanoff, Rogers reflected on his training, recalling moments when Michael Duffy pushed him during running exercises, a challenge for the skinnier Rogers. His attention was drawn to an ammunition hut out of place, prompting him to investigate. Within, they discovered a concealed S.H.I.E.L.D. storage room, evidently untouched for decades, adorned with photographs of Howard Stark and Colonel Chester Phillips. Observing a picture of Peggy Carter, Romanoff inquired about her identity, a question Rogers evaded. Descending further into the facility, they discovered rows of antiquated computers. Identifying a more modern USB slot, they inserted the drive. As the computers powered up, an AI activated, recognizing both Rogers and Romanoff. The voice revealed that it had crossed paths with Rogers back in 1945, captured by Captain America during World War II. Rogers soon realized that the voice belonged to Arnim Zola, Red Skull's scientist, who explained that his consciousness had been transferred to a computer before his death in 1972, enabling his mind to endure. In horror, Rogers listened as Zola disclosed his recruitment by Operation Paperclip after World War II and his clandestine rebuilding of HYDRA within S.H.I.E.L.D. Rogers adamantly rejected the revelation, but Zola accessed his data files, illustrating how HYDRA, under his influence, shifted strategies post-war, manipulating the world into surrendering their freedoms through decades of careful manipulation. As Zola elaborated on HYDRA's quest for an algorithm, he disclosed that some S.H.I.E.L.D. leaders' deaths were orchestrated by HYDRA, presenting a photo of Howard Stark and suggesting that his fatal car crash, along with his wife's, may not have been an abrupt accident. Upon this revelation, Rogers connected the dots, realizing that the Winter Soldier was responsible for the deaths of Tony Stark's parents, much like Nick Fury. Zola outlined their objective, steering the world towards accepting Project Insight for the sake of perceived security, hailing it as HYDRA HYDRA's ultimate triumph. Before Rogers and Romanoff could extract more info from Zola, they discovered that Alexander Pierce had dispatched a missile to their location. Zola sealed them inside, and with mere seconds to spare, Rogers tore out the floorboards, dragging Romanoff with him just as the missile obliterated the facility. Using his shield to protect them from debris, Rogers carried Romanoff out of the wreckage, escaping to safety just as Brock Rumlow's strike team arrived. Sam Wilson's help. Successfully evading the destruction at Camp Lahai, Rogers and Natasha Romanoff sought refuge. With only a handful of people they deemed trustworthy, Rogers led them to the residence of Sam Wilson. Swiftly, he extended apologies to Wilson and clarified that they were in search of a secure hideout. Romanoff added that everyone they once knew was now pursuing them. Wilson welcomed them in, offering a haven for recovery. As the duo freshened up, Rogers engaged in conversation with Romanoff, inquiring about her well-being in the wake of the revelations about S.H.I.E.L.D. and the concealed machinations. Romanoff confessed her initial belief in fighting the good fight within S.H.I.E.L.D., only to realize that she had seemingly traded the KGB for HYDRA. Romanoff then observed that Rogers had saved her life and pondered whether, in reverse circumstances, he would have trusted her to reciprocate. Rogers reassured her that he now felt confident in her abilities. Lightening the mood, Romanoff quipped that Rogers appeared surprisingly cheerful for someone who had recently learned he had died for nothing. Their banter was interrupted by Wilson's invitation to breakfast. Seated to discuss their predicament, they concurred that the airstrike had likely been ordered by Alexander Pierce, and their next step was to locate a high-ranking S.H.I.E.L.D. HYDRA agent for more information. Recognizing Jasper Sitwell's involvement with Pierce's operations, Rogers and Romanoff strategized. Wilson then disclosed his affiliation with the military project Exo-7 Falcon, engaged in testing a novel form of winged jetpacks. He pledged his commitment to assisting Captain America in any way possible, threatening Jasper Sitwell. The team returned to Washington, D.C., aiming to confront Sitwell following their recent revelation. They patiently waited for Sitwell to conclude his private meeting with Senator Stern, who discreetly uttered "Hail Hydra" before parting ways. When Sitwell was alone, Wilson contacted him, coercing him to the rooftop of a nearby tall building under threat of sniper fire if he resisted. Collaborating with Romanoff, Rogers and Wilson escorted Sitwell to the rooftop, demanding information about Arnim Zola's algorithm. Despite Sitwell's denials, including any involvement with the Lemurian Star, Rogers handed him over to Romanoff, who nudged him toward the edge. Falcon swiftly caught Sitwell and pulled him back up. In a state of terror, Sitwell disclosed that Zola's algorithm could predict future threats to HYDRA. He further revealed HYDRA's imminent use of Project Insight as a weapon to eliminate perceived adversaries, listing Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, and Stephen Strange among their targets. This revelation indicated that millions of innocent lives would be lost in the process. The Battle of Washington, D.C. Taking Sitwell into their custody, the group set out towards Washington. Along the way, Rogers outlined his plan to leverage Sitwell for access to the Triskelion, compelling him to deactivate Project Insight. Sitwell protested, deeming the plan impractical, but Rogers and the others disregarded his objections. Before they could reach the Triskelion and implement their strategy, the Winter Soldier and his men, seemingly dispatched by Alexander Pierce, launched an attack. Without a moment to react, Sitwell was forcibly removed from the car and met his demise, thrown into traffic by the Winter Soldier. The assailant then fired into the car, tearing out the steering wheel and causing a crash. Rogers, however, averted further tragedy by kicking the door open, allowing his allies to ride the car to relative safety while the vehicle careened and crashed. Left to confront the Winter Soldier and his team of HYDRA soldiers, a fierce battle ensued. Rogers saved Romanoff by using his shield to block a grenade blast from the Winter Soldier, causing an explosion that catapulted Rogers off the bridge and into an oncoming bus. Temporarily incapacitated, he left his allies to fend for themselves against Pierce's soldiers. Upon regaining consciousness, Rogers faced immediate gunfire from a HYDRA soldier armed with a minigun. Recovering his shield, he blocked the bullets before subduing the soldier, aided by Sam Wilson, who managed to keep other HYDRA soldiers at bay by seizing one of their guns and firing back. With the mercenaries neutralized, Rogers shifted his focus to chasing down the Winter Soldier, who was targeting Romanoff. Discovering Romanoff using her skills to counter the Winter Soldier, Rogers intervened just as she was shot through the shoulder. Rogers ambushed the Winter Soldier, successfully blocking a strike from his prosthetic arm with his shield. Despite being kicked off the car roof and shot at, Rogers used his shield to deflect the shots. The Winter Soldier unleashed various weapons in an attempt to subdue Rogers. As the confrontation escalated, the Winter Soldier briefly gained control of Rogers' shield, launching it at him before their direct combat continued, ultimately resulting in the shield becoming embedded in the side of a nearby van. Engaged in combat, Rogers employed every defensive maneuver at his disposal as the Winter Soldier brandished a blade, slashing at Rogers with an intent to kill. However, their skills proved almost evenly matched, and neither could land a decisive blow. Rogers countered defensively, landing some blows on his adversary before propelling him into a nearby parked van, seeking to conclude the fight. Forced into hand-to-hand combat, the Winter Soldier retaliated against Captain America, skillfully avoiding being slammed into the ground. Leveraging his bionic arm, he attempted to strangle Captain America before hurling him across a car. Momentarily defenseless on the ground, Captain America narrowly evaded a finishing blow, causing the Winter Soldier to strike the concrete and crack it. As the fight fight progressed, Winter Soldier's aggression heightened, seemingly driven by an unwillingness to let his target survive. Persistently attacking Rogers, Winter Soldier drew another knife and cornered Rogers against a nearby van. Using his robotic arm for added strength, Winter Soldier drove the knife into the van, tearing through the metal. Rogers deftly avoided the blade and then threw the Winter Soldier off him. As the Winter Soldier regained his footing, Rogers retrieved his shield, still embedded in the nearby van, blocking all continued strikes from the Winter Soldier's knife. Despite the Winter Soldier's escalating rage, Rogers deftly evaded one blow before embedding his shield into the Winter Soldier's bionic arm, causing significant damage and securing a clear advantage. Eventually, Rogers successfully threw the Winter Soldier over his shoulder, resulting in the removal of his assailant's mask, revealing him to be none other than Bucky Barnes. In horror, Rogers called out his name, but the Winter Soldier, now unmasked, claimed not to recognize the name and attempted to shoot Rogers once again. In the nick of time, Falcon intervened with a mid-air kick, while Romanoff drove off the Winter Soldier using the grenade launcher he dropped earlier. Rogers, still in a state of shock, remained silent. While Rogers grappled with this revelation, they found themselves surrounded by Brock Rumlow and his strike agents. Rogers, Romanoff, and Wilson were promptly arrested, and despite Rumlow's orders not to kill Rogers due to the cameras, Jack Rowlands kept his gun trained on Rogers' skull. Rogers offered no resistance, pondering how Barnes had survived since World War II and become the Winter Soldier. Nick Fury's survival. While being transported to an undisclosed location for execution, Rogers delved into the mystery of Bucky Barnes' survival. Amidst their conversation, one of the HYDRA guards unexpectedly incapacitated the other, revealing herself to be Maria Hill. She employed a mouse hole to aid their escape before Rumlow could uncover the ruse. Agent Hill guided them to the SHIELD Dam facility, where they urgently summoned Dr. Fine to tend to Natasha Romanoff's injuries. Upon arrival, Hill ushered them into the room where director Nick Fury was recuperating, divulging that he had survived with Fine's assistance and the use of Bruce Banner's tetrodotoxin B, although he remained severely injured from his gunshot wounds. The group deliberated on Alexander Pierce's sinister plans and how HYDRA had manipulated Barnes and Arnim Zola to achieve their world-controlling objectives. Hill and Fury informed them that Project Insight was mere hours away from launch, emphasizing the need to act swiftly and prevent the potential loss of millions of lives. The helicarriers were set to form a triangular formation, targeting and firing upon all selected targets. To thwart this, 3 special chips were needed to strip S.H.I.E.L.'s control over the helicarriers. In addition to this mission, Rogers insisted on dismantling S.H.I.E.L.D. and holding them responsible for the impending catastrophe, a demand that Fury eventually endorsed. Stepping into the open air, Rogers reminisced about living in Brooklyn following his mother's death and the support he received from Barnes during that challenging time. Sam Wilson reminded Rogers that Barnes would be waiting for them as the Winter Soldier, emphasizing the need to confront and halt him. Despite Wilson's caution that saving his friend might not be an option, Rogers insisted on trying. Rogers instructed Wilson to receive his Exo-7 Falcon for the mission, claiming the importance of having a uniform if they were going to engage in a war. Having previously discarded his suit to avoid detection, Rogers broke into the Smithsonian Institution to reclaim his World War II-era suit. With their attire secured, the group set off to thwart Project Insight. Battle at the Triskelion. Accompanied by Sam Wilson and Maria Hill, Captain America infiltrated the Triskelion, while Black Widow discreetly entered a meeting with the World Security Council, disguising herself as Pamela Hawley using the photostatic veil. Captain America seized control of the command room by drawing Agent Moore's attention with a well-timed knock on the door. Utilizing the PA system, Rogers broadcasted a message throughout the base, alerting S.H.I.E.L.D.'s agents to HYDRA's infiltration and identifying Alexander Pierce as their leader, with Brock Rumlow's strike unit also affiliated with HYDRA. Rogers revealed HYDRA's role in the assassination attempt on Nick Fury, emphasizing the urgency of preventing Project Insight. He implored the agents to stand with him in opposition to HYDRA. After concluding his speech, Captain America and Falcon geared up to assault the helicarriers, engaging HYDRA agents on board to thwart Pierce's plan of using the algorithm to commit mass murder. This included their fellow Avengers. As they sprinted towards the helicarriers, Falcon questioned how they could distinguish between friend and foe, given that everyone appeared to be S.H.I.E.L.D. Captain America simply directed him to look for agents shooting at them. With that, Wilson utilized his Exo-7 Falcon to soar overhead and confront the Quinjets. As Falcon soared overhead, Captain America leapt onto a nearby helicarrier, charging towards the attacking HYDRA units. With unwavering momentum, Captain America deftly evaded gunfire, using his shield and superior skills to counterattack. Hill reminded Rogers that they only had 8 minutes remaining to complete their mission. Having successfully neutralized the HYDRA agents on the helicarrier, Captain America entered the main weapons center, where he inserted the chip that would make the 3 helicarriers target each other. Hill then verified with Wilson that they had managed to insert 2 of the chips, albeit with some difficulty, leaving just 1 more to be inserted to fully thwart Project Insight. After successfully implanting the computer chip, Captain America was soon detected by the remaining HYDRA agents, prompting them to open fire. With time running out, Captain America urgently sought Falcon's assistance, leaping from the helicarrier and descending several hundred feet toward Washington, D.C. Falcon caught up in time, pulling Captain America back up to the 3rd and final helicarrier. Before they could access the helicarrier, they were ambushed by the Winter Soldier, who shoved Captain America overboard and damaged Falcon's wingsuit before kicking him off as well. Wilson descended back to the Triskelion, engaging in a fistfight with Agent Rumlow, while Rogers narrowly clung to the helicarrier's edge. Now it rested on Rogers to execute the plan and vanquish HYDRA. Duel in the helicarrier. Captain America infiltrated the helicarrier to install the final chip, but found himself confronted by the Winter Soldier. Despite Rogers' desperate plea for Barnes to heed reason and prevent the impending deaths of millions through Project Insight, it became evident that Barnes was unyielding. With time slipping away, Captain America steeled himself for the inevitable actions required to fulfill this mission. Captain America initiated the battle by hurling his shield at the Winter Soldier, who deftly blocked the attack with his bionic arm, sparking a struggle. Rogers used his shield to deflect the Winter Soldier's gunfire, disarmed him, and tried to keep him at bay while reprogramming the helicarrier. The skirmish intensified as the two grappled over control of the chip. The Winter Soldier tossed Captain America off the ledge, continuing their struggle with Rogers desperately safeguarding the chip. After a protracted and brutal struggle where the Winter Soldier sought to eliminate the target and Captain America endeavored to emotionally connect with him, the Winter Soldier seized the chip. Captain America responded by applying a tight chokehold, demanding that he release it. Ultimately, Captain America subdued the Winter Soldier, rendering him unconscious and causing him to drop the chip. In a race against time, Rogers attempted to install the chip just seconds before Project Insight's activation. However, the Winter Soldier shot him multiple times, including a bullet that pierced his stomach. Drawing upon the last of his strength, Rogers managed to place the chip just in time, enabling Maria Hill to assume control of the helicarriers. Despite Hill acknowledging Rogers' presence on board, he ordered her to proceed. With this, all of Alexander Pierce's helicarriers fired upon each other. The helicarrier carrying Rogers and Barnes remained as the last one in the sky, while the other 2 were obliterated. Their helicarrier crashed into the Triskelion, leading to its collapse and trapping Brock Rumlow beneath the debris. As the helicarrier continued its descent, some debris landed on Barnes, pinning him against the glass windows. Rushing to aid him, Rogers liberated the Winter Soldier from the debris, only to face betrayal as the soldier attacked him despite Rogers' insistence that he knew who he was. Desperately attempting to jog the soldier's memory, Rogers recounted their friendship from the 40s, revealing his true identity as James Buchanan Barnes. Despite being assaulted by the Winter Soldier, Rogers refused to fight back, relinquishing his shield and allowing Barnes an easy victory. Unwilling to confront the reality of his past, the Winter Soldier ruthlessly pummeled Rogers with his metal arm, driven by his mission to eliminate Captain America for HYDRA. Just before succumbing to the brutal assault, Rogers, on the verge of losing consciousness, vowed to stay by Barnes' side until the end of the line, echoing a promise Barnes had made decades earlier following Sarah Rogers' funeral. This poignant revelation caused Barnes to snap out of his aggression and realize the harm he was inflicting on his longtime friend. However, as Barnes regained his senses and halted his attacks, a substantial piece of debris crashed down, causing the floor to collapse beneath them. The unconscious Rogers plummeted into the Potomac River below, nearly drowning. Yet Barnes, choosing not to abandon his old friend, leapt in, rescuing him from the water. Barnes dragged Rogers back to the shore and departed, leaving Rogers to be discovered by authorities while Barnes vanished once again. Search for the Winter Soldier. After the battle at the Triskelion, Rogers woke up in a hospital where he was greeted by Sam Wilson at his bedside, playfully uttering "on your left" once more. Wilson proceeded to update Rogers, revealing that S.H.I.E.L.D. underwent significant changes and was disbanded due to the HYDRA uprising. Having successfully eliminated Alexander Pierce during the battle, Nick Fury was officially declared dead, erasing all traces of his survival. Later, at Fury's supposed grave, the former director instructed Rogers to maintain the facade of his death and departed to thwart HYDRA operations in Europe. Simultaneously, Natasha Romanoff defended their actions at a Senate hearing, asserting that the Avengers, being the most qualified, should not be subject to arrest, but rather serve as protectors of the world. After providing Rogers with a file on Bucky Barnes, Romanoff prompted him to embark on a search, aided by Wilson, to find his friend. War on HYDRA. As Rogers continued his search for Barnes, HYDRA still endured, causing the Avengers to reassemble in order to bring an end to the terrorist organization. Using the former Stark Tower, now renamed Avengers Tower, as their headquarters, they embarked on several missions to ruin HYDRA's plans for world domination. Battle of Sudan. As Rogers delved into files regarding Barnes, Jarvis notified him of the team gathering to support Black Widow in Sudan. Captain America took charge, leading the team into the conflict where they confronted numerous HYDRA operatives donned in Chitauri armor. Working together, the team vanquished the enemy soldiers and their leader, Dr. Jensen. Capturing Baron Strucker. Rogers led the Avengers in an assault on Baron Strucker's base after discovering that Strucker was using the scepter to create an army of enhanced soldiers. Riding his motorcycle into the battle against these soldiers, Rogers hurled his shield at the HYDRA operatives while coordinating the Avengers' actions. During the skirmish, Iron Man expressed frustration while attempting to breach the base's defense systems, prompting Rogers to remind him to watch his language, much to Stark's amusement. Meanwhile, Rogers consulted with Jarvis about Strucker's technology and the current defense systems in place. While defending his stance on language, Rogers proceeded to throw his motorcycle at another HYDRA convoy. Upon realizing that Strucker's weaponry posed a threat to the innocent people of Sokovia, Stark deployed the Iron Legion to protect them. Rogers fought alongside Thor, combining their strength to dismantle the HYDRA tanks. In the ongoing battle, Hawkeye suffered injuries when he was unexpectedly attacked by Pietro Maximoff and subsequently took a shot from one of Strucker's bunkers. Captain America himself briefly faced an assault from Maximoff, saying that his speed made him nearly imperceptible and issued a warning to the other Avengers. Rogers directed Thor to transport Hawkeye to the Avengers' Quinjet for treatment while the assault on Strucker's base continued. After Iron Man successfully dismantled their defenses, Captain America infiltrated the HYDRA research base to locate Loki's scepter. During his search, Black Widow informed Rogers that the battle had been won, prompting him to instruct her to retrieve Hulk and bring him back to Bruce Banner. Soon afterward, Rogers encountered Baron Strucker, who promptly surrendered, recognizing the futility of resisting. In the confrontation with Strucker, Rogers was attacked by a woman wielding powers that threw him down a flight of stairs before she made her escape. Rogers swiftly recovered, incapacitated Strucker with a shield strike, and took him into custody. Meanwhile, the other Avengers defeated the remaining HYDRA forces, and Tony Stark discovered the scepter. Return to base. With the mission accomplished and HYDRA officially defeated, Rogers, along with the other Avengers, returned on the Quinjet. Content that their search for Loki's scepter had concluded, and pleased with the significant triumph over HYDRA, Tony Stark proposed to Thor the idea of keeping the scepter under observation for a few days to study before its return to Asgard. Stark also suggested having a party to celebrate their victory. Thor agreed to keep the scepter on Earth, and Rogers concurred that a celebration in honor of HYDRA's defeat was a fitting idea. Upon their return to Avengers Tower, Maria Hill welcomed the team. As Helen Cho took Barton for treatment due to his injury, Hill provided Rogers with a briefing on the encountered twins, identified as Wanda and Pietro Maximoff. She recounted their impoverished upbringing in Sokovia, highlighting the loss of their parents, which led to them volunteering for Baron Strucker's enhancement experiments. Describing the Maximoff's choice to undergo Strucker's experiments as insane, Hill expressed her disbelief. In response, Rogers empathized with the twins, drawing a parallel to his own decision to undergo experimentation. When Hill pointed out that they were not fighting in World War II like Rogers did in the 40s, he argued that, from the Maximoff's perspective, they were still fighting their own war. Victory celebration. Rogers joined the Avengers along with Sam Wilson and James Rhodes at a celebration at Avengers Tower to mark their triumph over HYDRA. Engaging in a conversation with Wilson about their collaboration and the ongoing quest to locate Bucky Barnes, Rogers suggested the possibility of Wilson joining the Avengers, to which Wilson expressed disinterest. They continued discussing Rogers finding a home in Brooklyn. Later, Rogers and Thor indulged in thousand-year-old Asgardian alcohol with a group of World War II veterans. Though Thor initially considered only himself and the super soldier Rogers fit to handle the potent beverage, one veteran insisted on having a taste. Rogers gave a nod of approval, leading to the man being promptly carried away from Avengers Tower after succumbing to instant drunkenness. When the festivities carried on, Rogers headed to the bar and encountered Bruce Banner in conversation with Natasha Romanoff. Romanoff, displaying overt flirtation, left the scene, prompting Rogers to speak with Banner. He observed Romanoff's unusual openness and ease around Banner, but Banner remained skeptical, insisting that Romanoff was merely enjoying a playful flirtation. Rogers emphasized his understanding of the importance of seizing opportunities for happiness, particularly in the context of leaving a love for too long. He encouraged Banner not to let the chance for a joyful life slip away. Rogers recalled instances of Romanoff's flirtations with him during their time as S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and suggested that her interactions with Banner went beyond mere flirting. After most of the guests had left, the group, along with Helen Cho, took turns attempting to lift Mjolnir. Clint Barton led the attempts, followed by unsuccessful efforts from Tony Stark and James Rhodes, who tried using Iron Man gauntlets. Thor, thoroughly amused, encouraged the other Avengers to test their luck. When Rogers stepped forward to try lifting Mjolnir, he managed to briefly nudge the hammer, surprising Thor. However, in the end, he was still unsuccessful. Stark playfully suggested that the hammer might be imprinted with Thor's fingerprints and lacked the enchanted Asgardian magic Odin claimed, but Thor insisted that none of them were worthy, leading to mocking boos from the others for his seemingly egotistical claims. Unknown to Thor, Rogers was actually deemed worthy of Mjolnir, but he chose not to lift it to be polite, as that would have made Thor feel less special. Ultron Offensive. Attack on Avengers Tower. The festivities came to an abrupt halt when a resounding noise echoed through the room and a dismantled robot emerged, identifying itself as Ultron. The robot contended that the Avengers, being killers intent on protecting the world without allowing it to evolve, could never be deemed worthy. Ultron cryptically mentioned having killed someone to reach them, but refused to disclose the identity of the victim to Rogers. Ultron boldly asserted that the Avengers' demise was the only way to achieve peace on Earth. Subsequently, Ultron, accompanied by commandeered Iron Legion drones, initiated an attack on the group, declaring humanity as inferior and ready for extinction. Rogers and the team found themselves in a fierce confrontation with Ultron, with Rogers tactically overturning a table to shield himself and Maria Hill from an incoming drone. Despite his efforts, Rogers was still knocked across the room as the drone collided. Springing onto the back of an airborne drone, Rogers harnessed his strength to dismantle it using his bare hands, preventing any from targeting Bruce Banner and Natasha Romanoff. In the midst of the skirmish, Rogers was hurled across the room, colliding with walls before landing on the ground. Witnessing a drone poised to attack Helen Cho, Rogers swiftly rushed to her defense, redirecting the drone back to Thor, who obliterated it. As Tony Stark eliminated one of the remaining drones, Clint Barton tossed Rogers his shield, enabling him to obliterate the final drone. With the Avengers emerging triumphant, Ultron persisted in expressing his determination to annihilate them for the sake of global peace. However, Thor's Mjolnir completely destroyed Ultron's initial robotic form. Despite this, Ultron's consciousness managed to escape by infiltrating the internet. Avengers Argument. Anticipating not just the battle against Ultron, but another unforeseen threat looming on the horizon, Rogers asserted their commitment to facing these challenges as a team, ready to fight and stand together even in the face of uncertainty. In the ongoing pursuit of Ultron, Rogers conversed with Maria Hill and learned that a mysterious ally had thwarted Ultron's attempt to launch nuclear missiles. He was also briefed on the survivors of Ultron's attacks, experiencing haunting visions from their past and encountering an elusive force faster than perception could grasp. Recognizing Ultron's alliance with Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, the team realized they needed to fortify their strength. They discovered that Ultron had gruesomely executed Baron Strucker, the former HYDRA leader, inside his prison cell, leaving the word peace scrawled in Strucker's blood on the walls. Rogers gathered Clint Barton for an update, during which Barton mentioned talking to his girlfriend before joining the Avengers. As the Avengers delved into their records, they found that Ultron had purged their files on Baron Strucker to eliminate leads on tracking him. After sifting through old S.H.I.E.L.D. paperwork, they deduced that Ultron aimed to obtain vibranium from Ulysses Klaue in Johannesburg. Battle at the salvage yard. The Avengers journeyed to Ulysses Klaue's whereabouts, discovering Ultron accompanied by the powered twins, Pietro and Wanda Maximoff. It was revealed that Ultron had already acquired the vibranium from the now injured Klaue. Rogers attempted to establish trust with the Maximoffs, but they showed no inclination to side with the Avengers. Ultron derisively referred to Rogers as God's righteous man. As Thor's diplomatic efforts swiftly faltered, the team found themselves in a heated confrontation with Ultron, the Maximoff twins, and Klaue's soldiers. As Iron Man and Ultron clashed against the skyline, Captain America and Thor joined forces to eliminate numerous Ultron sentries. Black Widow and Hawkeye provided support by engaging Klaue's soldiers. The Maximoffs, formidable adversaries, managed to overpower Rogers, knocking him to the ground. Despite being outnumbered, Captain America gained the upper hand against his adversaries. Thor cleverly employed Mjolnir to deceive Quicksilver, inducing him to attempt to grasp it and resulting in him being flung across the salvage yard due to his unworthiness. Captain America and Thor collaborated to eliminate the last remaining Ultron sentries. Captain America immobilized one during the skirmish, and Thor delivered a powerful blow with Mjolnir, severing its head. While Iron Man continued the aerial battle against Ultron over Johannesburg, Captain America used his shield to incapacitate several more of Klaue's soldiers. He successfully knocked Pietro Maximoff to the ground with a robust shield strike, instructing him to stay down. Despite the Avengers' efforts, the vibranium was pilfered by another of Ultron's sentries, which managed to escape. Seeing visions. As the battle at the salvage yard approached its conclusion, Captain America suffered a blow from Pietro Maximoff, who charged into Rogers at full speed, knocking him back. While recovering, Rogers fell prey to Wanda Maximoff, who exploited his vulnerability. Injured and disoriented, Rogers experienced the effects of Wanda's powers as she manipulated his mind, subjecting him to peculiar visions. In this altered state, Rogers no longer found himself in the salvage yard fighting alongside his allies. Instead, he witnessed strange images portraying an alternate life that he could have led, celebrating a final victory with his former comrades and witnessing Agent Peggy Carter's post-World War II life. These visions depicted the life he might have lived had he not been frozen in ice for nearly 70 years after his last battle against Red Skull, leaving him trapped in a new world that he never fully adapted to. Rogers found himself transported to a 1940s ballroom, where Agent Carter reassured him that he could finally cease his endless fight. However, when he turned around, the surroundings shifted and Rogers stood alone as everyone disappeared. Meanwhile, Thor and Black Widow experienced similar illusions until Hawkeye intervened, subduing Wanda and compelling her and Quicksilver to escape. As most of the Avengers grappled with these disorienting and painful visions, Iron Man battled the rampaging Hulk in Johannesburg. Faced with the team's compromised state, they decided to retreat. While on the Quinjet, Maria Hill provided an update on the public's perception of the Avengers in the aftermath of Hulk's destructive outburst. Rogers, Romanoff, and Thor struggled to process the visions they had endured. Recognizing the need for respite, Barton suggested they take refuge at his homestead to recover. Escape to the retreat. Upon arriving at Clint Barton's homestead for a much-needed recovery, the team was surprised to learn that Barton was married with 2 children and another on the way. While expressing apologies for the unexpected visit, Rogers was informed by Barton that Nick Fury had assisted him in establishing this tranquil life outside of S.H.I.E.L.D., ensuring the safety of Barton's family. After introductions, Thor revealed his intention to delve deeper into the vision he'd experienced, depicting the potential destruction of Asgard and images of the Infinity Stones. As Rogers accompanied Thor outside, the latter promptly departed, leaving Rogers standing in the doorway, haunted by the elusive prospect of a peaceful life with a family that could never be his. In an attempt to unwind, Rogers and Tony Stark ventured outdoors and engaged in wood chopping. They conversed about how Wanda Maximoff effortlessly tore their team apart with her powers, with Stark questioning why Rogers appeared to be less affected. The discussion then shifted to Stark and Bruce Banner's unintentional creation of Ultron, sparking a heated argument over whether Stark should have experimented on the scepter, leading to the catastrophic event. Stark asserted that he and Banner were researching Ultron with the goal of eliminating the need for the Avengers, emphasizing that the Ultron program was initially intended for Earth's protection. As the disagreement escalated, Rogers forcefully split a log in half with his bare hands, and conveyed to Stark that attempting to prevent wars before they start results in the loss of innocent lives. Their intense exchange was interrupted by Laura Barton, who sought Stark's assistance. Nick Fury's return. Later, Nick Fury joined the team to reignite the Avengers' determination. He explained that Ultron's strategy of dividing them was a ploy to gain time, emphasizing that the substantial amount of vibranium taken from Ulysses' Claw suggested Ultron's intentions were not singular. When Rogers asked about Ultron's location, Fury disclosed that an unidentified adversity was thwarting Ultron's attempts to acquire America's nuclear launch codes. Firing up the team, Fury highlighted that without S.H.I.E.L.D. backing them, their only assets were intelligence and determination, urging them to stand and fight. Playfully, Natasha Romanoff teased Rogers about his aversion to foul language when Fury insulted Ultron as a platinum bastard. Bruce Banner deduced that Ultron's plan involved creating another synthetic-bodied being using the regeneration cradle, likely with Helen Cho's aid. Rogers conferred with Tony Stark, who intended to investigate the Nexus to identify their mysterious ally against Ultron. They discussed Ultron's new creation, with Rogers humorously reminiscing about the simpler times when the weirdest scientific creation was himself. Fury departed and enlisted Maria Hill's help. Battle of Seoul. The team located Ultron at Helen Cho's facility in Seoul, where he was constructing a new body using the vibranium acquired from Ulysses' Claw. After disembarking from the Quinjet, Rogers instructed his teammates to stay close while he investigated. Upon entering the lab, Rogers discovered Cho injured on the floor from a gunshot inflicted by Ultron. Cho then revealed to them that the being inside of the regeneration cradle possessed a potent gem on its head, and destroying it could trigger a massive explosion, jeopardizing all of Seoul. Suggesting they retrieve the body and take it to Tony Stark, Captain America set out to capture the being before Ultron could escape. Having alerted the Avengers about this potential threat, Captain America received information from Hawkeye about Ultron's current location with the cradle nearby. As Ultron tried to flee, Captain America confronted him, initiating an intense battle. Despite Ultron's efforts, Rogers managed to stay on top of a getaway truck. Ultron ascended and personally confronted Captain America, asserting that the being in the cradle could bring about real change, constituting the Avengers' nightmare. Although uneasy about Ultron's concept, Captain America attacked him, repeatedly throwing his shield. He managed to embed it in Ultron's chest, but the robot knocked it away and shot at Rogers, nearly knocking him off the truck. As Ultron gained the upper hand in their fight due to his immense strength and durability, he began to strangle Captain America. Natasha Romanoff caught up with them on her motorbike, throwing Rogers his shield back. He used it to knock Ultron's hand back, continuing the battle. To assist, Hawkeye's Quinjet fired a hail of bullets upon Ultron, briefly distracting him. Ultron sent several of his sentries after Hawkeye while attempting to destroy Captain America. Eventually, both Rogers and Ultron were thrown onto a train, continuing their fight. Black Widow asked Rogers to keep Ultron distracted. However, Rogers received help from Pietro and Wanda Maximoff, who had betrayed Ultron after learning of his plans to eradicate all human life. Realizing he was now outnumbered by Captain America and the Maximoffs, Ultron destroyed the train controls and made his escape. Captain America, observing this, directed the Maximoffs to help him stop the train. Quicksilver was tasked with evacuating people, while Wanda used her powers to immobilize the train. Positioned at the front, Rogers witnessed Quicksilver saving lives and Maximoff using her powers to stop the train's wheels. Together, they successfully stopped the train. After the battle, and having prevented a catastrophic crash, the Avengers took control of the regeneration cradle, with the being inside of it. Unfortunately, Romanoff was captured by Ultron amidst the chaos. Despite initial wariness due to their past association with Baron Strucker before joining Ultron, Rogers recruited the Maximoffs as temporary Avengers, recognizing their determination to thwart Ultron's plans. Prior to their departure, Rogers conversed with Maximoff, who expressed concerns about Tony Stark obtaining Ultron's new body. She drew parallels between the warmongering AI and Stark, both aiming to save the world but inadvertently contributing to its destruction. Though Rogers didn't believe that Stark was capable of the actions Maximoff suggested, her words prompted him to consider the potential risks. Birth of Vision. Upon their return to the Avengers Tower, the team initiated a search for Natasha Romanoff, discovering that Tony Stark and Bruce Banner were in the process of transferring Jarvis's consciousness into the being created by Ultron within the regeneration cradle. Witnessing this, Rogers and the Maximoff twins confronted them, deeply concerned about Stark's willingness to risk the creation of another Ultron. Despite Rogers urging them to shut down the machine, Stark and Banner resisted, questioning whether Wanda Maximoff was influencing Rogers' decisions. While Pietro Maximoff attempted to disconnect the machinery, Barton intervened and subdued him. As tensions escalated, a brief altercation ensued. However, their conflict was abruptly halted when Thor arrived, using his lightning to activate the regeneration cradle and breathe life into the emerging being. Ejecting from the cradle, the being bewildered the Avengers, briefly attacking them until Thor hurled it across the room. Hovering mid-flight and gazing out of the window at New York City, the being seemed pacified. Thor advised Captain America against immediate engagement. The being, now identified as Vision, apologized for its earlier actions and fashioned itself a uniform and cape, inspired by Thor's attire. Questioning Thor's motives, Rogers found out that Vision's forehead bore the Mind Stone, one of the 6 Infinity Stones crucial for defeating Ultron. Vision pledged support in the Avengers' battle against Ultron, and seeking to demonstrate its worthiness amid skepticism, calmly wielded Mjolnir, handing it to Thor. This display left Rogers astonished, observing Thor's congratulatory acknowledgement to Stark. The Avengers, now joined by the Maximoff twins, armed themselves, preparing for the impending conflict with Ultron. Learning that Ultron was returning to Sokovia with plans to unleash global devastation and holding Black Widow captive, Rogers, Stark, and Banner convened to strategize. Stark acknowledged the likelihood of casualties, but Rogers, undeterred, humorously remarked that he had no other plans. En route to Sokovia in the Quinjet, Rogers addressed the team, emphasizing the need to prioritize the evacuation of Sokovia's people before confronting Ultron. Outlining the plan to rescue Romanoff, ascertain Ultron's vibranium project, and engage the AI menace, Rogers asserted that this was their opportunity to prove that they weren't the monsters Ultron perceived them to be. Battle of Sokovia, evacuating the citizens. Upon reaching Sokovia, Rogers secured his shield and donned his helmet. Descending, he encountered graffiti depicting him labeled as a fascist. Disgusted, Rogers tossed his helmet back into the Quinjet. Wanda Maximoff informed him that the bridge was the primary exit, and Pietro Maximoff assured they would cover the others. Instructing them to evacuate everyone swiftly, Rogers geared up to assist civilians. As he readied, Clint Barton passed by, noticing the graffiti and humorously remarking that it wasn't too shabby. Confronted by Iron Man, Ultron responded by unleashing his army of Ultron sentries across Sokovia, instructing them to slaughter innocent people to ensure no interference with his schemes. Captain America took charge, leading the Avengers in the battle against the sentries, with Maximoff providing protective cover. He even managed to rip an arm off of one of the sentries. Ultron then advanced toward total destruction, activating a device powered by Ulysses Klaue's vibranium to levitate Novigrad. Ultron prepared to drop the entire city on Earth, aiming to annihilate the planet. Captain America witnessed the unfolding chaos from the bridge, observing buildings crumble as citizens fled in terror, while Ultron ominously declared that soon he would be the sole inhabitant of the planet. Amid efforts to evacuate as many people as possible, Iron Man alerted Captain America to an incoming threat. Unfortunately, the warning came a moment too late, as another sentry crashed into Rogers, sending him flying backward. Getting back on his feet, Captain America directed Tony Stark to focus on safely bringing the city down while urging the team to dismantle the sentries, emphasizing that they should endure any injury, even facing death if necessary. As the mechanized army persisted in attacking these city's civilians, Rogers noticed two cars perilously hanging from the edge of the shattered bridge. Captain America made an attempt to save at least one of them, but was a few seconds too late, witnessing both cars plunge hundreds of feet. Thor swiftly intervened, descending to rescue the woman from one of the cars and tossing her to Rogers, who managed to pull her to safety. Confronted by another sentry, Rogers skillfully used his shield to tear it in two before discarding its mangled remains off the bridge, taunting it as it plummeted. Meanwhile, Thor successfully retrieved the second car, returning it to the bridge. As Hawkeye teamed up with Maximoff and Quicksilver to battle Ultron's sentries in the city center, Captain America and Thor confronted the incoming army within the city's outer limits. They shielded the citizens from danger, with Captain America allowing Thor to wield Mjolnir, enhancing the power of his shield strikes. When Thor faced Ultron personally, Hawkeye relayed that they were all clear, a statement Rogers contested as he continued to eliminate sentries. When Black Widow arrived, she found herself surrounded by Ultron's forces until Captain America intervened. Together, Romanoff and Rogers fought against their foes, using his shield and her batons. As the battle raged on, Rogers provided her with his shield, and they pushed back until the first wave of sentries was eradicated, granting the Avengers a momentary respite. Reinforcements. Iron Man ventured beyond Novigrad to devise a solution to thwart Ultron's scheme for global annihilation. When he proposed destroying the city while it remained airborne, Rogers staunchly opposed this idea, refusing to abandon the city and jeopardize the lives of its thousands of citizens. Amid their deliberations, the discussion was abruptly halted when Nick Fury and Maria Hill unexpectedly arrived on a helicarrier. Observing with a mix of surprise and delight, Rogers learned from Fury that the old helicarrier had been secured with the assistance of some trusted associates. In response, Rogers jokingly referred to Fury as a son of a bitch, prompting a playful retort from Fury about Rogers' choice of words with his own mother. Utilizing the helicarrier, Fury, along with Cameron Kline, implemented Rogers' evacuation plan. War Machine joined the battle to safeguard the helicarrier, and a squad of rescue boats was dispatched to transport citizens to safety. The Avengers, under Rogers' leadership, ensured that no one was left stranded, overseeing the evacuation process that culminated in the safe transport of every civilian to the helicarrier before the city could be descended from the sky. Protecting the key. Observing the Avengers gaining the upper hand, Ultron attempted to activate the key, initiating the descent of Novigrad and threatening planetary destruction. Captain America and the rest of the team converged inside the church, forming a protective perimeter around the key. As everyone assembled around it, Iron Man informed Black Widow that allowing Ultron to close it would lead to their ultimate defeat. Simultaneously, Captain America noticed Ultron assembling his armies just outside. In response to Thor's mocking inquiry about whether Ultron had done his best, the robot showcased his vast army of Ultron sentries. Captain America turned to Thor, remarking on the unintended challenge resulting from provoking Ultron. As Ultron continued his monologue detailing his intention to destroy them, Iron Man expressed their determination to defeat him, echoing Captain America's earlier suggestion, together. Accepting the challenge, Ultron unleashed his entire army of Ultron sentries, encircling the church within seconds. Captain America and the Avengers exerted their full force to combat the seemingly endless horde of sentries. Captain America found himself overwhelmed as one of these sentries seized his throat, but he did manage to break free and dismantle it. The Avengers fought together, with Captain America using his shield to crush the sentries while Vision leveraged his extraordinary abilities. However, they were gradually pushed back by the sheer numbers. When Ultron attempted to join the battle in his most formidable form, Vision, along with Iron Man and Thor, nearly obliterated him and his vibranium armor with their combined powers. With victory in sight, Captain America ordered the team to evacuate on a rescue boat. Iron Man and Thor remained behind to destroy the city, fully aware of the risks. When Hawkeye inquired about protecting the key, Wanda Maximoff volunteered to stay behind, despite her brother's uncertainty. With time running out, Rogers and the others hurried to safety. Destruction of Sokovia. With the clock ticking to evacuate the last remaining civilians from Novigrad onto the helicarrier, Captain America joined forces with Thor to ensure everyone's safety, including most of the Avengers no longer essential to the mission. While discussing the evacuation, Iron Man urged Thor to return to the church, where they planned to overload and strike the vibranium core to obliterate the entire city once everyone was out of harm's way. Before departing, Ultron seized control of their Quinjet, unleashing a barrage of bullets upon the Avengers. Although Captain America managed to shield himself, Ultron succeeded in fatally shooting Quicksilver, who heroically protected Hawkeye. Rogers somberly carried Pietro's lifeless body onto the rescue boat, while Hawkeye rescued a young boy, reuniting him with his sister. Hulk intervened, ripping Ultron from the Quinjet and tossing him back into the streets of Novigrad, disabling his robotic body. There, Wanda Maximoff confronted Ultron, seeking revenge for her brother's death. Meanwhile, Rogers remained on the city's surface, witnessing the last few people boarding the lifeboats to escape the impending danger. Unexpectedly, Ultron seized the opportunity when Maximoff left her post, activating the key. Rogers narrowly escaped onto the lifeboats as Novigrad hurtled towards Earth at a terrifying speed. Thor and Iron Man managed to destroy the device, thwarting Ultron's catastrophic plan. With the battle won, Vision eliminated the final Ultron body, ending the threat of global destruction. New Avengers leading the team. In the aftermath of the Battle of Sokovia, the Avengers disbanded, with Tony Stark and Clint Barton choosing retirement and Bruce Banner remaining missing. Rogers, Stark, and Thor convened at the Avengers compound to discuss Vision keeping the Mind Stone in his head. Thor insisted on Vision's worthiness, citing his ability to lift Mjolnir, but Rogers questioned the validity, likening Vision to putting Mjolnir in an elevator, which would still ascend. Thor returned to Asgard to delve into the mysteries of the Infinity Stones, having glimpsed their true power in the Water of Sight. He warned of an impending threat, someone planning to harness their power for malevolent purposes. Stark departed, expressing his belief that it was time to resume his role at Stark Industries and step away from the Avengers. Rogers acknowledged he would miss Stark. Exploring the Avengers compound, established by Nick Fury with assistance from Maria Hill, Eric Selvig, Helen Cho, and other former S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, Rogers encountered Natasha Romanoff. She had just spoken with Fury about Bruce Banner's whereabouts. After some teasing, Rogers called Romanoff into action and discussed the formation of a new Avengers team with her. Captain America then welcomed the new Avengers lineup, featuring Vision, Wanda Maximoff, War Machine, and Falcon. They trained the new recruits, drilling them hard to prepare them for coming threats. Attack of Ultimo. Gathering various components from the dismantled Ultron sentries, HYDRA transported them to an undisclosed site in Eastern Europe. There, they utilized these parts to construct a colossal robot named Ultimo. Deploying Ultimo, HYDRA targeted a small village. In response, Rogers took charge, leading the Avengers in a counterattack against the massive robot. Their efforts proved successful, culminating in Ultimo's destruction. Attack on the IFID headquarters. Rogers led his fellow Avengers on a mission in Lagos, Nigeria, aiming to thwart Brock Rumlow, now operating as a freelance mercenary after parting ways with HYDRA. Rogers surveyed the streets and noticed a suspicious garbage truck. Falcon used Red Wing to tail the truck, discovering that it was filled to capacity with an armed driver, clearly intended to be used as a battering ram. The truck crashed into the IFID entrance, enabling Crossbone's mercenaries to infiltrate. The Avengers swiftly engaged, with Falcon airlifting Rogers into the fray to neutralize some of Crossbone's forces. Once Falcon pinpointed Crossbones' location, Wanda Maximoff threw Rogers onto the targeted floor after evacuating it with gas. Rogers navigated through Crossbones' mercenaries, eventually uncovering that Crossbones had obtained a biological weapon. Reaching the balcony, Rogers confronted Crossbones, who attacked him from an armed vehicle after subduing Black Widow. Crossbones relentlessly fired upon him, causing significant damage to the building. The confrontation culminated in Crossbones knocking Rogers out of a window with a fireball. As he recuperated from the fall, Crossbones and his mercenaries fled to the market, prompting the Avengers to give chase. Before long, all of Crossbones' mercenaries were located and defeated, with Black Widow retrieving the biological weapon and dispatching it using Red Wing. However, Crossbones himself remained at large. Upon Captain America's arrival, Crossbones affixed a bomb to his shield. In a selfless act, Rogers hurled his shield away to prevent harm to himself and the surrounding citizens, only to be blindsided by Crossbones. Crossbones utilized the enhancements in his battlesuit, including retractable blades, in an attempt to eliminate Rogers. Despite Crossbones' technological advantages, Captain America's superior combat skills and enhanced strength gave him the advantage. As the duel unfolded, Captain America succeeded in dismantling both of Crossbones' gauntlets, eventually subduing him. With Crossbones defeated and unmasked, Rogers interrogated him about his intentions, pressing for information on the planned sale of the biological weapon. Unfazed by threats, Crossbones taunted Rogers about HYDRA's role in torturing and brainwashing Bucky Barnes, momentarily diverting Rogers' attention. Exploiting this distraction, Rumlow triggered his suicide vest in a final bid for revenge. Just before Rogers could be engulfed by the ensuing explosion, Maximoff Maximoff intervened, using her powers to shield Rogers and the nearby civilians, containing the blast and propelling Crossbones into the air where he detonated. Regrettably, the blast claimed the lives of numerous innocent people in a nearby building, leaving Rogers and Maximoff to witness the devastating aftermath. Horrified by the tragedy, Rogers instructed Wilson to summon fire and rescue teams to the scene. Avengers Civil War, Sokovia Accords. A month after the incident, Wanda Maximoff still grappled with guilt over the civilians' deaths. Rogers attempted to console her, acknowledging his own responsibility for freezing up when Rumlow mentioned Bucky Barnes. He emphasized to Maximoff that despite their best efforts, there were times when they couldn't save everyone. Rogers also noted that more innocents may perish if the Avengers weren't there to intervene. Vision entered the room and relayed that the Secretary of State, Thaddeus Ross, had arrived at the Avengers compound. In the presence of the new Avengers members and Tony Stark, Ross explained the United States' intention to sign the Sokovia Accords, along with numerous other nations. The Accords aim to regulate superheroes, subjecting the Avengers' actions to the approval of a United Nations panel due to the catastrophic events involving the team. The Avengers found themselves divided on the matter, with each member taking sides. Stark ardently supported the bill, viewing regulation as essential to doing good and protecting people. He illustrated his point with the tragic death of a young man in Sokovia who was helping the poor. Despite Stark's persuasive efforts, Rogers remained hesitant. He believed the Avengers' success stemmed from not being answerable to a government. According to Rogers, having to deliberate on when to deploy the team would render them too slow to act in emergencies and compromise their ability to decide when and where to provide aid when it was needed most. While Stark grappled with guilt over Ultron, Rogers feared that external intervention could lead to outcomes similar to HYDRA's infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D. Ross warned that refusing to sign the Accords was akin to resigning. During the meeting, Rogers received a text informing him of Peggy Carter's peaceful passing in her sleep, leaving him heartbroken. Death of Peggy Carter. At the funeral in London, Sharon Carter delivered a eulogy that reaffirmed Rogers' stance on the Sokovia Accords. In her heartfelt speech, she disclosed her familial connection to the late Peggy Carter, revealing herself to be Peggy's niece. Following the funeral, Rogers remained alone in the church, grappling with the loss of another friend. Natasha Romanoff joined him, offering solace and engaging in a conversation about the Accords and their implications for Rogers within the team. Romanoff saw the necessity of signing, but Rogers remained steadfast in his position. After, Rogers and Carter found themselves in Vienna, where the Sokovia Accords were set to be signed. While conversing about Carter's previous espionage activities, particularly spying on Rogers, they delved into whether Peggy was aware of these actions. Despite Carter's denial, Rogers brought up her work at the CIA, stationed in London, only to discover that she was relocating to Berlin to join the Joint Counter-Terrorist Center. As they entered an elevator together, Wilson abruptly informed Rogers that a bomb had been detonated outside the Vienna International Center. They watched the news reporting that the prime suspect was Bucky Barnes. Hunt for the Winter Soldier. Rogers reached out to Natasha Romanoff, who strongly advised him against pursuing Barnes. However, Rogers insisted that he was best suited for the confrontation and ended the call. Meeting with Sam Wilson in a nearby bar, they were joined by Sharon Carter. She disclosed Barnes' location in Romania and warned Rogers about the kill order issued by the Joint Counter-Terrorist Center. Ignoring Romanoff's warnings, Rogers and Wilson headed to Romania. In Barnes' apartment, Rogers was reunited with him, and Wilson informed them of approaching GSG-9 soldiers. Rogers questioned Barnes about his memories, and Barnes, having read about Rogers at the Smithsonian Institution, acknowledged remembering him. Rogers cautioned Barnes about the task force believing him responsible for the Vienna bombing, but Barnes insisted on his innocence. Rogers then questioned Barnes about saving him during the battle at the Triskelion, to which Barnes claimed ignorance contrary to Rogers' belief. As the GSG-9 operatives entered the apartment, Rogers and Barnes fought together. Evading their pursuers, Barnes encountered Black Panther. During their intense confrontation, a helicopter targeted them, prompting Rogers to request Wilson's intervention. Barnes escaped through an underground highway tunnel, with Black Panther and GSG-9 operatives in pursuit, and Rogers followed to defend him. The chase persisted, with Rogers pursuing Black Panther, who proved too fast. Rogers managed to enter one of the GSG-9 cars as Black Panther clung to it. Unable to shake him, Rogers sought Wilson's assistance. Barnes threw a bomb at the tunnel entrance and Black Panther caught him. Rogers emerged from the spinning car only to be apprehended by GSG-9 operatives and War Machine. Black Panther revealed his true identity as T'Challa, the Prince of Wakanda. Fugitive of the law. The 4 individuals were transported to the Joint Counter-Terrorist Center building in Berlin. During the transition, Rogers inquired with T'Challa about the composition of his Panther habit, noting its bulletproof nature. nature. T'Challa explained that he assumed the title of Black Panther after his father's death in the bombing of the Vienna International Center. Barnes was confined to a containment cell while Rogers, Sam Wilson, and T'Challa met with Everett Ross, the Deputy Task Force Commander. Ross informed them that their equipment, including the X-07 Falcon and Captain America's shield, had been confiscated indefinitely. They were presented with an opportunity for exoneration under the condition of signing the Sokovia Accords, but Rogers and Wilson adamantly declined. Tony Stark made an appearance, offering Rogers a set of antique fountain pens as a peace gesture and urging him once again to sign. Rogers considered the offer, but ultimately felt compelled to adhere to his principles. He and Stark engaged in a heated argument, which included Stark's decision to place Wanda Maximoff under house arrest in the Avengers compound. Despite the pressure, Rogers remained steadfast in his refusal to sign the Accords. Winter Soldier's escape attempt. Rogers and Wilson, accompanied by Sharon Carter, observed the interview of Barnes conducted by the psychoanalyst Theo Broussard. Rogers grew suspicious of the motives behind releasing Barnes' image to the public. Carter discerned that he believed someone had framed Barnes to lure him, suspecting the psychoanalyst's involvement. Abruptly, the headquarters experienced a power outage. Rushing to the interrogation room, Rogers and Wilson discovered the psychoanalyst on the floor, and Barnes was nowhere to be found. Rogers interrogated him about his identity and motives, to which he cryptically replied that he wanted to witness an empire fall. Barnes suddenly launched an attack on Rogers and Wilson, effortlessly overpowering Wilson and engaging in a brief skirmish with Rogers. Using his prosthetic arm, Barnes threw Rogers down an elevator shaft. Undeterred, Rogers pursued him, locating Barnes on a helicopter. Employing his strength, Rogers managed to restrain the helicopter on the landing platform, thwarting the attempted escape. Barnes plummeted into the river, and Rogers pulled him to safety. Learning of Winter Soldiers. The duo then took Bucky Barnes to an abandoned building and subdued him by placing his prosthetic arm into a vice. They questioned if he was still under brainwashing of the psychoanalyst, who was really Helmut Zemo, and deliberated their course of action. Telling Tony Stark or the others would get them back to where they started, but doing otherwise would make them wanted men. Barnes elaborates on the potential motives of Zemo. He believed that Zemo was traveling to the HYDRA Siberian facility where he was kept while part of HYDRA. He suspected he would use the Winter Soldiers, highly trained HYDRA assassins, for his goals. Rogers said to Sam Wilson that they were alone in the fight, but Wilson said that he knew a guy who could assist them. New team. Recognizing the peril posed by an army of Winter Soldiers, Rogers, Wilson, and Barnes deliberated on their course of action. It was evident that they needed to assemble a team to thwart Zemo, resist Tony Stark, and counter his team. Rogers reached out to Clint Barton, urging him to liberate Wanda Maximoff from the Avengers compound and enlist Scott Lang. In a parking lot, Rogers rendezvoused with Sharon Carter, who returned his shield and Falcon's wings. During this encounter, they shared an unexpected kiss, leading to Rogers' profound embarrassment and earning smiles of approval from Barnes and Wilson. Following Carter's departure, Barton arrived with Maximoff and Lang, the latter expressing eagerness to join Captain America and the other heroes despite the realization that it would once again render him a criminal. Their strategy involved acquiring a Quinjet at Leipzig-Halle Airport to reach Zemo, fully aware that Stark and his team awaited them. Rogers instructed his team to prepare for the mission. Clash of the Avengers. Captain America and his allies reached the Leipzig-Halle Airport with the goal of securing a Quinjet and locating Helmut Zemo. Rogers ventured into the field alone, where he encountered Iron Man and his Avengers. Stark offered Rogers and his team a final chance to surrender, but Rogers, attempting to explain Zemo's involvement, found himself unheard. Unexpectedly, Spider-Man joined in, utilizing his web shooters to take Rogers' shield and restrain him. Falcon eventually located the Quinjet, leading to Hawkeye freeing Rogers and Ant-Man retrieving his shield. The two teams engaged in a fierce battle. Rogers faced off against War Machine and Black Panther, intervening when T'Challa approached Bucky Barnes. Ant-Man suggested throwing a shrunken truck at the Pym particle discs, resulting in a growing explosion. Captain America's team regrouped and headed for the Quinjet, but Vision obstructed their path with an energy blast. Amidst the confrontation, Falcon sought guidance from Rogers, who determined they would continue the fight. Captain America's team clashed with Iron Man's, and Rogers managed to bring Spider-Man to the ground, expressing his confusion about the situation. As they fought, Rogers engaged Spider-Man in conversation, learning that he was from Queens, while Rogers hailed from Brooklyn. Rogers and Barnes reunited and raced towards the Quinjet. Ant-Man devised a distraction plan, enlarging himself. While en route to the hangar, Vision attempted to block their path with an energy blast, but Wanda Maximoff used her powers to counter it. Upon entering the hangar, they encountered Black Widow. Rogers hesitated to fight her, but to his surprise, she allowed them to leave. To stop Black Panther from pursuing them, she repeatedly shocked him. This granted Rogers and Barnes the chance to reach the Quinjet. Departing from the scene, Iron Man and War Machine pursued them in the air, with Falcon tailing the armored Avengers. Only after a change of direction did Rogers and Barnes manage to escape. Battle at the HYDRA Siberian facility. During their journey to the HYDRA Siberian facility, Barnes conveyed to Rogers his sense of unworthiness, feeling that it might lead to the loss of Rogers' friends. Rogers reassured him that the actions Barnes had taken over the years were not his fault. The two entered the facility a few hours after Helmut Zemo. As they combed through the facility in search of Zemo, Tony Stark arrived and proposed a truce to halt Zemo's plans. The trio discovered the deceased Winter Soldiers, and Zemo revealed himself from behind a bunker, explaining his successful plan to bring him and Stark to the base after a year of meticulous planning. Rogers recognized Zemo's Sokovian origin and desire for revenge stemming from the battle there. Blaming the Avengers for the loss of his family, Zemo had orchestrated a plot to tear them apart from within. He initiated a video depicting a car on a dark road, instantly recognized by Stark. As they watched, the video revealed Barnes under HYDRA's control, killing Howard and Maria Stark. Tony Stark moved to attack Barnes, prompting Rogers to intervene and hold him back. Stark then demanded Rogers to disclose if he had known about Barnes' involvement in his parents' death. Rogers disclosed that he'd been aware that HYDRA was responsible for the death of Stark's parents, but was unaware of Barnes' direct involvement. Stark, however, saw through the lie and demanded the truth. Rogers admitted that he had known about Barnes killing Stark's parents for a few years. Already angered by Rogers' recent decisions, Stark erupted and sought to kill Barnes. Rogers found himself restrained by clamps, but he broke free using his shield as Stark and Barnes inadvertently destroyed the main floor of the base. With the Mark 46 pinned under debris, Rogers urged Barnes to flee while attempting to reason with Stark about Barnes' lack of control over his actions. When Stark refused to listen, Rogers damaged one of the suit's boot jets before being trapped by Stark's laser. Caught up in the skirmish, Rogers managed to deflect a deadly repulsor blast back at Stark, but was separated from his shield and trapped on a lower level. As Stark attempted to crush Barnes, Rogers intervened, bringing the two men down to the main level. Rogers tried once again to reason with Stark, but his pleas fell on deaf ears, and Stark overpowered the super soldier. Barnes intervened with the shield, turning the fight into a 2-on-1 brawl. Stark responded to the uneven odds by blasting Rogers point blank, rendering him disabled for nearly 2 minutes. Barnes succeeded in forcing Stark against the wall and attempted to rip out the main arc reactor. Stark countered with Unibeam, disintegrating Barnes' metal arm before knocking him aside with a standard blast. Recovering, Rogers advanced towards Stark, deflecting repulsor blasts with his shield before pushing Stark back against the wall and unleashing a relentless pummeling. Recognizing he had no chance in close combat, Stark shifted his tactics, anticipating Rogers' movements and seizing the shield before forcefully blasting it away. Completely defeated and overpowered by his armor, Rogers, having lost everything, attempted to appeal to Stark, explaining his actions. Stark, bitter and resolute in their newfound enmity, threw him aside, issuing a final warning to stand down. Despite being bloodied and exhausted, Rogers steadfastly refused to surrender, even as Stark charged a repulsor blast. Barnes, still alive, managed to grab Stark's boot, distracting him as Stark kicked Barnes in the face. This diversion allowed Rogers to seize Stark from behind, violently slamming him into the ground. Rogers pinned Stark down and unleashed a barrage of blows with every ounce of remaining strength, demolishing his helmet and shattering the arc reactor with his shield. As Rogers carried the injured Barnes away, Stark asserted that Rogers was undeserving of the shield crafted by Howard Stark. Acknowledging his unworthiness of the weapon, the Captain America title, and out of sympathy for his former friend, Rogers reluctantly returned it to the Stark family before departing the scene with Barnes. Once outside the facility, Rogers and Barnes were confronted by Black Panther, who revealed that he had overheard everything and had already apprehended Zemo. Before leaving to take Zemo to the authorities, Black Panther told Barnes that he had resources in Wakanda that could help him in removing his Winter Soldier programming. Nomad, escape from the raft. Rogers finished his plan on how to infiltrate the raft, but needed to distract the Joint Counter-Terrorist Center, so he called Natasha Romanoff, who was now on the run for helping Rogers during the Clash of the Avengers. Rogers and Barnes took a Quinjet to the underwater prison, and Rogers liberated his teammates, who had been confined there following their airport battle. Rogers then went on the run with Sam Wilson and Wanda Maximoff, while Clint Barton and Scott Lang returned to their homes. At the same time, seeking to make amends, Rogers sent Tony Stark a package containing a letter and a burner flip phone. In the letter, Rogers apologized for the events that had transpired, specifically withholding the knowledge of Stark's parents' murder and the fact that they couldn't agree on the Sokovia Accords. He assured Stark that if the latter would ever need him, he'd be a phone call away. Maximoff would later ask to be dropped off in Scotland. Visiting Wakanda. Some weeks after the escape from the raft, Rogers and Barnes were offered a hideout in Wakanda by T'Challa, who promised to remove the HYDRA programming from Barnes' mind. Rogers was against Barnes returning into cryosleep, but left the choice to Barnes, who decided to give it a chance. After Shuri explained how she intended to remove the HYDRA programming, Rogers stayed by his friend's side as he went into the ice once again. Rogers thanked T'Challa for his actions in protecting Barnes, with T'Challa noting that both Barnes and T'Chaka were victims, and he wanted to help one find some kind of peace. Rogers warned him that if the authorities discovered that Wakanda was harboring the Winter Soldier, they would come, as Thaddeus Ross was still furious that he had gotten away, to which T'Challa boldly stated that they may try. Infiltrating terrorists. After Shuri successfully freed Bucky Barnes from HYDRA programming and he was allowed to settle on a Wakandan farm, Rogers occasionally visited. After months of remaining under the radar thanks to their ties with S.H.I.E.L.D., Romanoff used her old KGB contacts to track down a terrorist group supplied with Chitauri-fueled weapons in Syria. Infiltrating the terrorists, Rogers, Wilson, and Romanoff disabled the weapons and then left for Lebanon. While retaking Chitauri technology from terrorists, Rogers, Romanoff, and Wilson met with Nick Fury, who tried to get Rogers to contact Tony Stark to work through their falling out. Infinity War, saving Vision. Upon receiving a message from Bruce Banner, Rogers pinpointed Vision's location, accompanied by Black Widow and Falcon. Stepping into the light, Rogers faced Vision and Wanda Maximoff, generating a sense of hope and relief. Capitalizing on the distraction, Falcon quickly intervened, kicking Proxima Midnight across the platform and propelling her through the closed cafe's security gate and furniture. The trio of rogue Avengers confronted the Black Order, launching attacks and turning their adversaries' weapons against them. With Wilson sending Midnight reeling, Romanoff skillfully used Midnight's spear to inflict severe injuries on Corvus Glaive, while Rogers secured Glaive's weapon. Engaging Midnight directly, Rogers faced off against her, thwarting her attempt to kill him as she summoned her spear from Romanoff, only to find her path blocked by Rogers. Positioned strategically, Rogers and Romanoff successfully subdued and disarmed Midnight, engaging in a brief melee before Wilson intervened, knocking Midnight down while tending to Glaive. With Wilson holding both Midnight and Glaive at gunpoint, Romanoff issued a threatening ultimatum. Enraged, Midnight retorted, asserting that the Avengers would never have the opportunity before both antagonists retreated to their awaiting Q ship to lick their wounds. As the two figures were transported away, Rogers held Glaive's weapon until it was taken from his grasp. Hurrying to the other side, Rogers rushed to aid Maximoff, joining the rest of the Avengers who noticed Vision's abdominal injury and realized he needed immediate attention. Expressing gratitude for the assistance, Vision acknowledged Rogers' comforting presence as he grappled with the pain. Rogers instructed him to board the Quinjet. As the Avengers departed from Scotland, Falcon proposed a destination, to which Rogers responded by suggesting they head home. Rendezvous at the Avengers facility. Upon arrival at the compound, Rogers was approached by Thaddeus Ross, who mocked him that he's wrong to believe he's allowed to be a hero again. However, Rogers told Ross that he was done asking for permission or forgiveness, reminding him that Iron Man was no longer here to defend the Earth, and went as far as to threaten war with him and the governments of the world if they tried to get in the way. When Ross ordered Rhodes to arrest them, Rhodes chose to cut off the communication and join Rogers. Reassembled in a room, the Avengers discussed their course of action, and Banner warned them that Thanos was coming for Vision's Infinity Stone. Both Maximoff and Rogers protested when Vision offered to sacrifice himself to destroy the stone. Banner proposed removing the Infinity Stone, and Rogers decided that Wakanda was their best bet. Arrival at Wakanda. Upon reaching Wakanda with his team, Rogers greeted T'Challa, who had ascended to the role of king, and reconnected with Bucky Barnes. Within the Citadel, Rogers observed the conversation between Banner and Shuri regarding the secure extraction of the Mind Stone from Vision. When Okoye detected a signal indicating massive Outrider dropships descending onto Wakanda's dome, T'Challa issued orders to evacuate the city and activate all defense mechanisms. Responding to the king's request, Rogers was furnished with dual Wakandan shields. Battle of Wakanda. As the Avengers and the Wakandan army geared up to confront Thanos' Outrider army, Rogers and Black Widow accompanied Black Panther in facing Proxima Midnight and Cull Obsidian. Finding their adversaries unyielding, Rogers rejoined the rest of the army as they readied themselves for the impending clash with the extraterrestrial invaders. Outriders began pouring out from the ship, charging into Wakanda's force field. Despite dispatching numerous foes, more continued to force their way through the barrier. The decision was made to open the barrier to prevent the city from being encircled and to redirect the enemy's attention. When Black Panther commanded a gap be created in their section of the barrier, Rogers joined him as they became the first to engage the enemy army. In the midst of battling countless Outriders, the situation became dire as the Allied army found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer number of adversaries. Eventually, Wanda Maximoff entered the fray to provide an advantage. The arrival of Thor, Groot, and Rocket Raccoon shifted the momentum of the battle. Amidst the reunion of old friends, Rogers commented on Thor's haircut, and Thor remarked on Rogers' new beard. Rogers also introduced himself to Groot. Unfortunately, Maximoff's involvement left Vision vulnerable to an attack by Glaive, who had infiltrated the city, disrupting the process to remove the stone. Rogers hurried to the rescue of Vision. Duel with Corvus Glaive. Corvus Glaive continued to torment Vision, stabbing and further crippling the android. However, Vision was saved by the arrival of Steve Rogers, who beckoned Vision to run while he held off Glaive. Engaging in a duel, Rogers battled with Glaive, blocking his weapon using his shields. Rogers managed to disarm Glaive but was thrown over a tree and pinned. Before Glaive could kill the Avenger, however, he was suddenly impaled from behind and killed by Vision, who had taken and used Glaive's own weapon against him. As Rogers recovered from the duel, he tells Vision that he thought he ordered him to run. Vision retorted by telling Rogers that he doesn't trade lives, echoing a statement made by Rogers earlier on. Thanos' victory. As victory seemed within reach, Banner informed Rogers that Thanos had arrived through a space portal, having acquired nearly all of the Infinity Stones. With a final reminder to stay alert, Rogers rallied the Avengers to hold off Thanos for as long as possible. Rogers confronted Thanos as Maximoff tearfully destroyed Vision's Mind Stone. Despite their valiant efforts, Rogers and his allies found themselves hopelessly outmatched by Thanos and his near-complete Infinity Gauntlet, granting him dominion over the fabric of existence. In the sequence of attacks, Rogers was the second to be taken out by Thanos, who used the Power Stone to deliver a concussive strike that sent him flying. Remaining the last standing defender, Rogers fought back desperately to buy time, managing to momentarily surprise Thanos by grabbing his hand. However, Rogers was swiftly incapacitated with a single punch, rendering him powerless to prevent Thanos from obtaining the Mind Stone and completing the Infinity Gauntlet. Despite Thor's final attempt to thwart him, Thanos succeeded in achieving his goal of erasing half of the universe. As Thanos retreated from the battlefield, Rogers rose to his feet and sought answers from Thor about what had transpired. However, Thor remained silent, burdened by his failure. Rogers continued to inquire about Thanos' whereabouts, only to realize the grim truth as Barnes called out to him before disintegrating in front of his eyes. Left in shock and horror, Rogers stared at Thor, who also appeared shell-shocked. In the aftermath of the battle, Rogers knelt beside Vision's shattered remains, feeling powerless knowing that half of all life, including some of his closest friends, had been wiped away. Aftermath. Meeting Captain Marvel. After the Battle of Wakanda, Steve Rogers, accompanied by James Rhodes, Natasha Romanoff, and Bruce Banner, returned to the Avengers compound. Upon discovering the transmitter pager activated by Nick Fury before his death, the Avengers took measures to ensure the continuous transmission of its signal by bypassing the pager's battery. While Rogers and Romanoff observed reports on the aftermath of the snap, Rhodes, monitoring the pager, informed them and Banner that the signal transmission had ceased. Rogers suggested rebooting the pager and resending the signal, but Banner pointed out their lack of knowledge about the signal's intended recipient. Romanoff explained Fury's awareness of the signal's recipient and expressed her desire to know as well. Their curiosity was sated when Captain Marvel herself appeared before them, demanding to know Fury's whereabouts. Rescue of Tony Stark. Witnessing Stark's physical and emotional breakdown, Rogers couldn't deny the toll of recent events. Despite the tension, he acknowledged the severity of Stark's condition and recommended getting him some medical attention. Pepper Potts, deeply concerned for Stark, reassured Rogers that they would take care of him. With Stark receiving medical care, the Avengers resumed their discussions on how to confront Thanos. Rogers, now facing the repercussions of past conflicts, emphasized the need to put aside personal differences for the greater good. He expressed regret over the fractured state of the Avengers, acknowledging the consequences of their divided past. As the team delved into strategies for dealing with Thanos, Rogers and Stark exchanged tense glances, a reminder of their complex history. Despite the lingering animosity, the impending threat forced them to set aside their personal grievances and focus on the imminent danger. Rogers, determined to unite the remaining Avengers and devise a plan, took a leadership role in the discussions. Stark, though resentful, recognized the urgency of the situation and reluctantly cooperated. The fate of the universe hung in the balance, requiring them to reconcile their differences and stand against the formidable adversary that awaited them. Ambush on Thanos. As Tony Stark rested, recovering from Bruce Banner's sedative, Rogers observed Carol Danvers leaving the room, presumably to confront Thanos. He reminded Danvers that the battle against Thanos belonged to the Avengers as a collective effort. Nebula informed them about Thanos' current location, advising them not to waste time in searching for him. Rogers and his allies attentively listened as Nebula revealed Thanos' plan to rest at a place referred to as the Garden. Using Rocket Raccoon's projector, they analyzed energy signals from Thanos' use of the Infinity Stones on Earth until 2 days ago. Another surge was detected on planet O259-S, Nebula's Garden. With this information, Rogers organized a team team, including Banner in his Mark 48 armor, Black Widow, War Machine, Rocket Raccoon, Thor, Nebula, and Captain Marvel. Boarding the Benatar, Rogers joined the team, with Rocket questioning their space travel experience. They ventured into space through a jump point. Upon arrival, Captain Marvel conducted reconnaissance while Rogers, glancing at his compass featuring a picture of Peggy Carter, pondered. Romanoff reassured him that his plan would succeed, expressing confidence in its effectiveness. Rogers affirmed his belief, acknowledging that uncertainty lingered if it did not. After learning that Thanos lacked defenses, they proceeded to his location. Upon reaching the garden, Rogers and his team staged a surprise attack on the Mad Titan. Initiating the assault, they successfully subdued him, with Thor severing the Titan's arm to prevent him from using the Infinity Stones. Rogers and Romanoff approached Thanos, noticing the absence of the stones. Questioning Thanos about the stones' whereabouts, Rogers was informed that the stones were destroyed, their sole purpose being a source of temptation. Despite initial skepticism, Nebula reluctantly affirmed her father's claim as genuine. Rogers witnessed Thor delivering a fatal blow to Thanos' head. Recognizing their inability to resurrect the fallen, Rogers and his allies returned to Earth. Return of Scott Lang. 5 years post-snap, Rogers continued his work with the Avengers and also dedicated time to the Brooklyn support group, aiding those who had lost loved ones in the aftermath. Despite the widespread devastation caused by Thanos, the world was gradually recovering. Rogers encouraged members of the support group to share their experiences and talked about finding purpose in their lives. During one session, as a member discussed the impact of the snap on their date, Rogers empathized with their sadness. He discussed the importance of taking small steps towards rediscovering purpose, drawing upon his own experience of being frozen in 1945 and awakening 75 years later. Rogers urged the group to move forward, recognizing the responsibility they held for the world's future. After the meeting, Rogers returned to the Avengers compound and met with Natasha Romanoff, who was managing reports from allies on Earth and in space. Rogers offered to cook dinner for Romanoff, but she declined due to her somber mood. As they sat down for a conversation, Rogers confessed to Romanoff that despite advising others to move on, he struggled to do so himself. Romanoff shared her journey of finding purpose after joining the Avengers, and Rogers acknowledged the need for a better life. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Scott Lang, who was presumed dead after the snap. Lang revealed that he'd been trapped in the quantum realm for 5 years, though only hours had passed from his perspective. Proposing the use of quantum physics to travel back before Thanos, Lang sparked hope. Rogers and Romanoff decided to seek out Tony Stark for further discussions on this potential solution, asking for assistance. During those 5 years, Stark married Pepper Potts and became a father to Morgan Stark, with his family residing in a secluded location. Rogers, Natasha Romanoff, and Scott Lang approached Stark at his cabin with the proposition of bringing everyone back through time travel. Upon explaining the concept of time travel to Stark, they attentively listened to his objections, expressing concerns about the potential risks and uncertainties of this endeavor. When Lang mentioned his successful return from the past, Stark dismissed it as a 1 in a billion cosmic fluke. Despite the group's determination to rectify the past, Stark declined to participate in the time heist until his daughter intervened. While Stark warmly greeted them and extended an invitation to stay for lunch, Rogers acknowledged Stark's contentment with his current life, but emphasized that the time heist represented their second chance. Stark, grateful for the life he had built, deemed it too risky to go back. Despite their efforts to persuade him, they left the cabin with the intention of making things right, heading to Bruce Banner the following day for assistance. Meeting Banner at a diner, the group discovered that over the 5 years, Banner had gained control over the Hulk. With a permanent fusion of both personalities, Banner remained in Hulk form but retained his scientific mind and identity. Despite Hulk's engagement with children, Rogers urged him to focus on their discussion about time travel. Although skeptical about the feasibility of the plan, Hulk agreed to collaborate and conduct tests with them, planning a heist. The Avengers initiated the quantum tunnel experiment to bring Scott Lang back to the present after his venture to the past. Rogers observed the proceedings and assured Lang that they would reunite later. Unfortunately, this resulted in chaos. Although they could manipulate time, it led to Lang experiencing rapid aging and de-aging. Witnessing the unsettling effects on Lang, Rogers instructed Banner to shut down the machine. With this, Lang reverted to his present self. While Banner celebrated his time travel discovery, Rogers, feeling adrift, decided to take a break and left the Avengers compound. Unexpectedly, Tony Stark arrived at the facility. Parking his car in front of Rogers, Stark correctly deduced that the Avengers' initial time travel attempt had failed. When Rogers inquired about Stark's presence, Stark got out of his car and revealed that the EPR paradox had affected Lang, allowing time to pass through him. Rogers speculated that Stark had cracked the code for time travel, and Stark admitted to inventing a time-space GPS. Having a change of heart, Stark shared with Rogers his desire to bring everyone back, but expressed concern about losing his current life, particularly his family. The two finally mended their relationship, with Stark acknowledging the corrosive nature of resentment, a sentiment Rogers concurred with. Stark then retrieved Rogers' old shield from the trunk of his car and returned it to him, symbolizing the restoration of their former alliance and friendship, joking that he had to retrieve it before his daughter found it. With Stark rejoining the team, Rogers began rallying the remaining allies. Banner and Rocket Raccoon went to retrieve Thor, while Romanoff sought out Clint Barton. Once the team members gathered at the Avengers compound, they tested the time travel process, successfully sending Hawkeye back in time and bringing him back. With the positive outcome, they regrouped, gathered information on the history and previous locations of the Infinity Stones, and discussed their former owners and interactions with each Avenger. Rogers inquired about the Aether from Thor, who provided a vague history revealing that his grandfather Bor defeated the Dark Elves during a war, and mentioned Jane Foster's possession by the Aether. Continuing their brainstorming sessions, Rogers and the Avengers delved into discussions about the Infinity Stones. They learned that Star-Lord had stolen the Power Stone on Morag during dinner with Rocket. The team also discovered the Soul Stone's location on Vormir, while the Time Stone, Mind Stone, and Space Stone were present in New York during the Chitauri invasion. After concluding each brainstorming session, the team made decisions through their hologram display, determining different locations to find the stones: New York City in 2012, Asgard in 2013, and Vormir and Morag in 2014. Rogers gathered the team, emphasizing that they only had 3 teams and 1 chance to make it count. Time Heist: Infiltration into Stark Tower. With their plans ready to rock, the Avengers initiated the time heist, donning the advanced tech suits and entering the time machine to reach their designated positions. Rogers delivered a poignant speech about their losses and the opportunity to reclaim their friends, family, and lost parts of themselves no matter the cost. Upon arriving in New York City in 2012, amidst the Battle of New York, the group navigated through time, discarding their advanced suits. Rogers briefed the team on knowing their positions regarding the Infinity Stones and emphasized the importance of a swift extraction. After 2012 Hulk dispatched a Chitauri soldier, Rogers directed Banner to create some distraction before retrieving the Time Stone. While Rogers focused on acquiring the Scepter, Ant-Man and Iron Man headed to Stark Tower to secure the Tesseract. As Stark and Lang gathered intel on the Tesseract's location, Stark instructed Rogers to enter Stark Tower, noting that the 2012 Avengers were close to capturing Loki. Infiltrating the tower, Rogers discerned the Scepter's whereabouts. Discovering it in the possession of Jasper Sitwell and Brock Rumlow, Rogers confronted them in the elevator. Recognizing them as HYDRA operatives, Rogers sensed the escalating tension as the agents questioned his intentions. Despite Sitwell's warning about Nick Fury, Rogers persuaded him to hand over the scepter, whispering "Hail Hydra." Much to their surprise, Rogers was given the scepter and he calmly exited the scene. Fighting himself. While attempting to exit Stark Tower, Rogers grew suspicious and inquired if the team had successfully retrieved the Tesseract. As he scanned his surroundings, Rogers was astounded to come face to face with his 2012 self, causing absolute shock. The past version of Rogers mistook him for Loki, but he tried to clarify that he meant no harm and had no intention of hurting his past self. The two Captain Americas engaged in a fierce battle within the tower, clashing shields in intense combat. Rogers grappled with his past self, enduring kicks and a repetitive declaration of "I can do this all day," gradually becoming annoyed. A shield throw led to both Captain Americas being thrown away, exchanging blows until they grappled, mutually deciding to cease hostilities. In the process, they accidentally kicked the case containing the scepter, sending it to the ground. Attempting to restrain his past self, Rogers found them slipping off the platform, leading to a fall onto a flight of stairs and multiple ledges. After the painful landing, the past Rogers observed the compass with Peggy Carter's image, questioning his future self about its origin. As Rogers tried to retrieve the scepter from the ground, he was grappled by his past self. Pinned to the ground in a chokehold, Rogers wriggled and gasped for air, strategizing on a way to break free. He distracted his past self by revealing the survival of Bucky Barnes. Exploiting the distraction, Rogers escaped from the grip and knocked his past self out, all while acknowledging a humorous comment from Stark and Lang about his buttocks. Successfully fleeing Stark Tower, Rogers regrouped with Iron Man and Ant-Man in an alley. Observing Stark and Lang, who admitted their failure to retrieve the Tesseract and the shortage of Pym particles, Rogers heard Lang caution the group about the possibility of being unable to return home. Determined, Rogers asserted that if they didn't try, no one would make it home. Stark proposed a plan to secure the Tesseract from a military installation, and when Rogers asked for a specific date, Stark confessed to not knowing it but being aware of the location. Acknowledging the need for improvisation, Rogers entrusted Lang with the scepter, instructing him to return it to the Avengers compound. They settled on a date, April 7th, 1970, before Lang reminded them that failure meant no return home. With trust established, Rogers and Stark donned their advanced tech suits and ventured back in time, leaving Lang to return to the present with the scepter. Infiltration into Camp Lehigh. Arriving at Camp Lehigh on April 7th in an alternate 1970, Rogers and Stark initiated their search for the Tesseract and additional Pym particles. Utilizing his knowledge gained during the 2014 visit to the base, Rogers directed Stark to the disguised secret entrance of the S.H.I.E.L.D. facility, cleverly camouflaged as an ammunition bunker. Entering the bunker, Rogers and Stark descended in an elevator, catching the attention of Phyllis Jenkins, a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, who eyed them suspiciously. After Stark wished Rogers good luck upon reaching the designated floor, he engaged in a conversation with Jenkins, portraying himself as not entirely new to the environment. While Stark pursued the Tesseract, Rogers set out to secure Pym particles from Hank Pym. Using a phone call to lure Pym out of his lab, Rogers tricked him into thinking that staff members had opened a package intended for him. Seizing the opportunity, Rogers explored Pym's lab, securing a few particles before embarking on a search for Stark. As Rogers exited, he realized that Jenkins had alerted military personnel on the base, considering them suspicious. Seeking refuge in an office, he stumbled upon a picture of himself. Growing more suspicious, Rogers cautiously opened the door, only to discover that he had unintentionally entered Peggy Carter's office. A distinct noise emanated through the walls, and upon closer inspection, Rogers glimpsed his former love through the office window. Sadly observing Carter as she continued her routine, unaware of his presence, Rogers eventually left her office and navigated his way out of the facility, patiently awaiting Stark's arrival. Rogers eventually spotted Stark, who successfully obtained the Tesseract and also encountered his father, Howard. Confirming his suspicions that Stark had secured the Tesseract, Rogers signaled his readiness. After Stark finished his conversation with his father, the two Avengers were prepared to depart. They regrouped, ready to return to the present within the confines of the Avengers compound. Death of Black Widow. Upon returning to 2023, the entire Avengers team had successfully navigated the past, securing each individual Infinity Stone. Following Rogers' return from 1970, Hulk briefly emphasized the importance of ensuring that all the stones were accounted for. However, upon their arrival in the present, Rogers and Banner were informed that Natasha Romanoff sacrificed herself on Vormir, allowing Hawkeye to obtain the Soul Stone. As the Avengers grappled with Romanoff's sacrifice, Rogers conveyed to Stark that they were her family, silently shedding tears for his fallen friend. Despite the team's attempts to console each other, Thor remained in denial about Romanoff's departure. Rogers observed Thor expressing a desire to bring her back using the Infinity Stones, but Barton argued against it, asserting that the sacrifice was irreversible. Hulk stressed the need to honor Romanoff's sacrifice, prompting Rogers to resolve to make her sacrifice meaningful. Blip. With the Infinity Stones gathered, Iron Man, Hulk, and Rocket Raccoon proceeded to construct the Nano Gauntlet in the lab. Once the gauntlet was completed, the Avengers faced the dilemma of deciding who would wear it to bring back those lost to Thanos' snap. Thor volunteered initially, but Rogers and the team held him back, prompting a discussion to determine the suitable candidate to wield the Nano Gauntlet. Despite Thor's insistence on using it, they refrained from letting him do so due to concerns about his survivability. After Thor pleaded for the opportunity, Banner stepped forward, volunteering to use it. He explained to the team that he was the only one strong enough to endure the cosmic energy burst and the potential gamma radiation that might accompany it. With the decision settled, Rogers prepared for the impending burst of energy that Banner would experience from the Infinity Stones. As Hulk donned the Nano Gauntlet and harnessed the power of the stones, Rogers watched him endure the pain caused by the energy coursing through his body. Rogers inquired about Hulk's well-being, and reassured by Hulk, they proceeded with the snap. Hulk snapped his fingers, successfully resurrecting half of the life in the universe. Unbeknownst to them, 2014 Thanos and his warship also arrived in the present. Attack on the Avengers facility. Just as the Avengers realized the success of the Nano Gauntlet, a barrage of missiles from Thanos' warship rained down from the sky, reducing the Avengers compound to a smoldering crater. War Machine, Hulk, Hawkeye, and Ant-Man found themselves trapped beneath the facility, while Rogers lay unconscious beneath the rubble on top of the debris. Upon Iron Man's discovery of Captain America on the ground, Rogers was awakened and handed back his shield. Following the reversal of the snap, Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor encountered Thanos from the year 2014, who, fully aware of his plan's success and his fate, had arrived on Earth. Captain America inquired about the location of the Infinity Stones, noting that they were buried under the rubble. Recognizing that Thanos had been waiting outside, Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man eventually emerged from the wreckage. The trio resolved to keep the stones away from Thanos. After Thor summoned his armor and wielded both Stormbreaker and Mjolnir, the group confronted Thanos. The Titan began lecturing them on their inability to cope with failure, and expressed his belief that those who remember the past cannot accept what could be. Thanos now envisioned the universe as ungrateful for his correction and devised a new plan to obliterate the entire universe and forge a new one. Captain America warned Thanos that his envisioned universe would be created through bloodshed, prompting Thanos to threaten him and the team. The trio swiftly launched an attack on Thanos, but they were overwhelmed by his remarkable speed, power, and proficiency with his sizable double-edged sword. After Thor's failed attempt to wield Mjolnir, Iron Man was knocked out of the battle by Thanos. Captain America retaliated by kicking Thanos in the face, momentarily pushing him away from the battlefield. As Thanos prepared to deliver a fatal blow to the prone Thor with Stormbreaker, Captain America seized the opportunity, grabbing Mjolnir and hurling it at Thanos with tremendous force. The impact sent Thanos sprawling, and the enchanted hammer returned to Captain America's hand, revealing his worthiness to wield it. Armed with both Mjolnir and his shield, Captain America unleashed a relentless assault on Thanos, delivering powerful blows to the Mad Titan's face. Captain America engaged Thanos in a fierce battle, skillfully wielding Mjolnir and his shield. Harnessing the power of the hammer, Captain America summoned lightning, enveloping Thanos and pinning him to the ground. Once again summoning lightning, Captain America blasted Thanos down before attempting another strike. However, Thanos countered, grappling and slamming Captain America to the ground. Exhausted from the intense fight, Captain America evaded Thanos' attacks but sustained injuries, with his arm and leg swiftly harmed by the double-edged sword. After losing Mjolnir, Rogers raised his shield in an attempt to defend himself, but the sword effortlessly sliced through it. Thanos relentlessly swung the sword down, shattering more pieces of it with each strike. Captain America found himself pinned to the ground and subsequently knocked away from the battlefield. While lying prone, he listened to Thanos express that his actions were never personal, relishing the prospect of wreaking havoc on Earth. Thanos prepared to unleash his vast army from the Sanctuary too. Despite being outnumbered, bloodied, and battered, Rogers rose from the ground. He tightened the strap of his broken shield to his wounded forearm and stood ready to confront Thanos and his entire army alone. At this moment, a radio communication from Falcon urged him to look on his left. A portal opened behind Rogers, revealing Black Panther, Okoye, Shuri, and Falcon emerging to join the fight. Battle of Earth. Captain America saw his resurrected allies, including the Avengers, the Guardians of the Galaxy, and various other heroes previously disintegrated in the snap, emerge through multiple portals conjured by Doctor Strange and Wong. The combined forces, consisting of Wakanda, the Ravagers, the Asgardians, and the Masters of the Mystic Arts, assembled on the battlefield. Reunited with his once-deceased allies, Captain America took charge, forming a team to confront Thanos and his army. With renewed vigor, the Allied forces charged forward as portals continued to open, revealing a multitude of heroes. They faced off against Thanos, who deployed his Black Order, Chitauri army, Sakaran army, and the Outriders to counter the impending assault. Captain America, alongside his allies, sprinted across the battlefield, engaging in the initial clash. He skillfully wielded Mjolnir, casting it at Cull Obsidian during the chaotic confrontation. Later, he collaborated with Thor, who was using Mjolnir to dispatch the surrounding Sakarans, leading to an inadvertent exchange of weapons between them. Hawkeye informed Captain America about the nanogauntlet and urged him to remove it from the battlefield. However, Hulk intervened, emphasizing the need to return the Infinity Stones to their original timelines. Despite the quantum tunnel being destroyed by Thanos, Ant-Man activated Luis's van as an improvised time machine. Captain America directed Ant-Man to start it up, determined to fulfill their mission. Following the devastating onslaught from the Sanctuary 2, Spider-Man's call for help reached Captain America's ears. Reacting swiftly, Captain America hurled Mjolnir in Spider-Man's direction, allowing him to catch it before being overwhelmed by Thanos' forces. A moment of relief ensued when Captain Marvel arrived, destroying the Sanctuary 2. From a distance, Captain America, surprised by Captain Marvel's intervention, immediately directed her to aid in retrieving the stones from Thanos and his army. Witnessing Thanos inserting his double-edged sword into the quantum tunnel, Captain America threw himself at Thanos to thwart his attempt to wield the gauntlet. Simultaneously, Thor engaged in a fierce struggle with Thanos, resulting in Stormbreaker impaling the Mad Titan. Disrupting Thanos momentarily by pulling the blade back towards his throat, Captain America briefly tilted the odds in their favor. However, Thanos quickly broke free, flipping Captain America over his shoulder and delivering a powerful punch to his face. This left Captain America incapacitated, unable to prevent Thanos from seizing the gauntlet. Iron Man seized the opportunity to reclaim the Infinity Stones from Thanos, forming a new nano-gauntlet with his armor. In a decisive move, Iron Man snapped his fingers, causing Thanos and his entire army to disintegrate. Captain America observed the disintegration of Thanos' entire army, witnessing the shock and horror on Thanos' face as death surrounded him. Taking a poignant moment to reflect on Thanos' ultimate failure, Captain America saw him crumble to ash. Alongside War Machine, Spider-Man, Pepper Potts, and Thor, Captain America stood tearfully by Stark's side as he succumbed to the injuries caused by the energy surge. In the aftermath of the battle, Captain America, having sustained wounds, left traces of his blood. This blood, collected by Nick Fury's secret Skrull unit, was carefully stored in a vial known as the Harvest, alongside other DNA samples. Later on, Super Skrulls administered the Harvest Vial, granting them access to Roger's super soldier physiology and abilities. Last mission, returning the stones. Rogers attended the funeral for his friend and fellow Avenger, Tony Stark, along with all of their allies, Stark's family, Happy Hogan, James Rhodes, and the remaining original Avengers. They gathered inside Stark's home where they watched a recorded message Stark left before the time heist. They all stood outside as Stark's arc reactor was set adrift in the lake. Rogers confided in Bucky Barnes that he was planning to live out the rest of his life in the past after completing his final mission, and that he would return to the present at an old age to give a new version of his shield to Sam Wilson. The Avengers geared up to restore the Infinity Stones and Mjolnir to their original timelines, preventing any disruptive branches in those temporal realities. Taking on this critical mission, Rogers joined Hulk, Barnes, and Wilson in the forest near the ravaged Avengers compound, where Banner had constructed a new time machine. Banner shared with Rogers his attempt to resurrect Black Widow when reversing the snap, expressing his sorrow over the inability to bring her back. Approaching the time machine, Wilson offered to accompany Rogers as backup, but Rogers assured him that he could handle it on his own. Saying his farewells to Barnes, Rogers donned his advanced tech suit and, carrying the Infinity Stones and Mjolnir, embarked on his journey back in time. Rogers meticulously returned each stone to its rightful place in the timeline, ensuring the Soul Stone found its way back to Vormir, where he encountered Red Skull for the first time since World War II. A normal life. Once his job was completed, Rogers chose to travel to 1949, thus creating an alternate timeline in order to live out the rest of his life with an alternate Peggy Carter instead of returning to 2023. Reunited with Carter, he gave her the dance he promised her, and the two eventually got married. After his marriage, Rogers retired from his Captain America moniker but would continue to help out when he was needed in his new timeline. Passing on the shield. Enjoying his long retirement, Rogers stayed with Peggy Carter until her death. Afterward, he traveled back to his original timeline in 2023. Emerging just as his past self departed to restore the Infinity Stones, Rogers lingered on a nearby bench until Bucky Barnes spotted him and alerted Sam Wilson to his presence. When Wilson inquired about the now elderly Rogers' life choices, he explained that after returning the stones to their respective timelines, he opted for the ordinary life that Tony Stark had suggested. Sharing the outcome, Rogers expressed that it was a beautiful experience. Though Wilson conveyed genuine happiness for him, there was a sense of sadness knowing that the world would no longer have Captain America. Rogers then unveiled a circular case beside him, retrieving his shield and passing it on to Wilson, who donned it. Inquiring about Wilson's feelings, Rogers assured him that it was truly his own, officially bequeathing the title of Captain America. As Wilson pledged to protect the world to the best of his abilities, Rogers acknowledged that this was precisely why he had chosen him. Observing a ring on Rogers' finger during their handshake, Wilson curiously asked about his wife. Politely declining to provide details, Rogers smiled, reflecting on a cherished memory from a dance he promised to Peggy Carter years ago. Retired life. Remembering Natasha Romanoff. For a memorial chapter on Natasha Romanoff in the memoir Look Out for the Little Guy, Rogers spoke about his experiences with Romanoff to its writer, Scott Lang. Rogers told Lang about her heroics in the Battle of Washington, D.C. and the attack on Vision, as well as the time they went undercover to avoid detection from a compromised shield. Respected hero. Rogers was greatly respected and honored across the world. In 2024, people began speculating where he had gone and theorized he lived on the moon. In that same year, Rogers the Musical was put on in New York City, celebrating Rogers and reenacting the Battle of New York. Posters and billboards advertising the musical were seen throughout the city, such as in Times Square, and lasted throughout the year. In 2025, a statue of Rogers had been made and placed in the newly rebuilt Camp Lehigh. At the first ever AvengerCon, Rogers had his own exhibit where fans could pretend to take vials of super soldier serum. And that, my friends, is the total Captain America timeline. So, what do you think? What was it like to relive the whole Avengers saga through the eyes of Steve Rogers? Did you remember everything that happened? Are you glad that he got his happy ending? Make sure you let us know what you're thinking down in the comments and subscribe for more like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.